So here we are. I've said before that I would never do a Superman Iceberg because unlike Batman and Spider-Man, I just don't really care too much about the character of Superman. I don't dislike him by any means. I've just never really gotten into him outside of like the DCAU. But as a thank you for watching my videos and getting me to 50,000 subscribers, insane. I don't know how you did that or why you did that. I've decided to give the people what they've been asking for. A Superman Iceberg. Like with the Batman and Spider-Man icebergs, this won't just be about Superman though. I'm going to include some entries and topics about characters related to Superman. For example, like Supergirl, Power Girl, General Zod, Lex Luthor, etc. Also, I've covered some Superman topics before in other videos, like the Batman Iceberg, the Batman Iceberg Part 2, and the Spider-Man Iceberg. Things like Spider-Boy, Kingdom Come, Superman at World's End. But yeah, anyways, if you want to see those topics talked about, go watch those videos. They're great too. Anyways, with all that being said, let's just get down into it. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for giving my channel a chance. Superman Red Sun. Superman Red Sun is an Elseworld story written by Mark Millar that tells the story of what would happen if Kal-El landed in the Soviet Union instead of Kansas. The story lasted for 3 issues and told the story of Kal-El, who landed on Earth in 1938, and is instead raised by the Soviet Union government. Though this Kal-El isn't actually from Krypton, but instead a future version of Earth that's falling apart due to the sun turning into a red giant. And so Kal-El was sent back in time to escape dying with his family. Anyways, because he was raised by the Soviet Union, his morals and ideology were just a little bit different from the mainline soups. For example, when he became the leader of the Soviet Union, his government created Superman robots. These aren't actually robots though, but they're instead the result of forced brain surgery that turns people into mindless obedient drones. All of this really gets under Lex Luthor's skin, and so he tries several different attempts to kill Superman, from creating Bizarro, working with Brainiac, helping out Batman, and even creating a Green Lantern Corps military on Earth. This all leads to a big old fight where Wonder Woman and the Amazons fight Superman, Brainiac manipulates Superman into thinking that he was on his side. Ultimately, this whole big fight leads to Superman retiring and living amongst humanity. Lex Luthor, meanwhile, cures every single disease possible in the world, and even created his own philosophy called Lutherism, which is already the name of a religion, so he's gonna have to change the name. Lex's leadership then leads to the galaxy being colonized by humanity, and everything's pretty neat. You know, it's a pretty dope time to be a human. That is, until the sun turns into a red giant billions of years in the future, and Kal-El gets sent back in time, creating a cycle. It's revealed then in the story that Kal-El is the son of a distant relative of Lois Lane and Lex Luthor. This story has become probably the most well-known and beloved Superman Elseworld story, receiving critical acclaim when it was released. This has led to this universe's Superman and other Red Sun characters like Batman and Wonder Woman to appear in plenty of media. Examples include video games, a kinda live-action adaptation in Supergirl and by extension the Arrowverse, an animated adaptation, a cameo in Justice League Action, a cancelled live-action movie, which you can see me talk about in the Batman Iceberg, and many different other comics. The Richard Donner Cut. So long story short, Richard Donner, the director of the original Superman film, was replaced as the film's director after filming on the project had wrapped up. This resulted in Richard Lester taking over production as director, which further resulted in completely new footage being filmed, along with scenes from the original Superman 2 removed from the film entirely. A lot of these scenes include Marlon Brando, who played Superman's daddy, as Brando claimed that he had never received his percentage of the first Superman film's gross, which led him to filing a restraining order to prevent the company making Superman 2 to use his likeness. And so, this Richard Lester cut of Superman 2 was the only version of the film to be viewable for decades, until 2005 when Warner Bros. Had Richard Donner return to recut Superman 2 and place back all the original footage that wasn't used in the theatrical version, and so in 2006, the Richard Donner cut was released on DVD and Blu-ray. This is the closest we'll ever get to the original version of the film, as while the film does use most of the original footage that was taken out of the theatrical release, the film was never originally completed, and so certain scenes from the theatrical cut had to be placed into the film, along with some screen tests, in order to complete the film. As for whether or not the Richard Donner cut is the canon version of events featured in the film, I don't think it is. Like, I think the theatrical cut, like Superman 2, is the canon version of events, but it's generally agreed upon that the Donner cut is the better film, so, oh well. I mean, that's what matters at the end of the day, if it's a better film or not. Forgetful Kiss. Even if you've never seen Superman 2, you probably know how Superman in that film has an ability to wipe people's memories by kissing them. This was a power created for the film, and to my knowledge has only appeared in this film, besides some parody stuff like Robot Chicken. However, there have been some people who have claimed that this power was actually adapted from a Superman comic, Action Comics 306, released in November of 1963. This, however, isn't true, as Clark only kisses Lois with such force that it makes her dizzy, not lose her memory. And so the Forgetful Kiss is just one of the many original powers to appear in these films. Superman vs. Goku. So everyone loves a who would win in a fight debate. Well, one of these debates would become extremely infamous online for how heated these arguments become. That being, who would win in a fight? Superman or Goku from Dragon Ball? A ton of people believe that Superman would win, while a ton of people think that Goku would win. And so it's gone on for decades now of just people just constantly arguing. I have no idea personally who would win in a fight because I don't really know anything about Dragon Ball, but I know that Death Battle at one point said Superman would win in a fight twice for some reason. So maybe they're right, I don't know. I have no stakes in this. If you do have an opinion on this, leave it in the comments below, because I'm sure there's going to be at least somebody there who disagrees with you. Man of Steel 2. A sequel to Man of Steel has probably been the most talked about potential DCEU movie out there, with rumors about the film beginning even before Man of Steel was released in 2013. And as time's gone by, the rumors and leaks have only gotten more and more prominent. There were talks about Matthew Vaughn directing the film, J.J. Abrams taking over the project, James Gunn was apparently in the running at some point. And of course, there was Zack Snyder, who was supposedly either going to direct or write the film. But despite all of these rumors and what have you, nothing concrete has happened. Zack Snyder has said in the past that his original plan for a second Man of Steel was going to involve Brainiac as the main villain, along with the rest of the Kryptonians from the end of Man of Steel returning from the Phantom Zone. Again, wasn't that the plot of the first Man of Steel? Henry Cavill has also stated several times that when a Man of Steel 2 does happen, it'll be more faithful to the source material. Despite this, like I said, nothing concrete has happened yet. At least until recently. Following his cameo at the end of Black Adam, it's been reported that a Superman solo film is in active development yet again at DC, with Henry Cavill even stating that his appearance in Black Adam was only a taste of what's to come. So, who knows? Maybe Man of Steel 2 is finally happening. Though at the same time, the DCEU has been very weird with potential films. It just announces random things, then cancels a couple months later. Power Girl's boobs. So Power Girl is extremely hot. Probably one of the hottest comic characters out there. And a lot of people think that because, well, she's got a pretty big bust size. But what's interesting about her breasts, what a sentence, is that they weren't always this big. You see, the only reason why Power Girl's chest or bust size is the way it is because Power Girl's creator, Wally Wood, was convinced at the time of her creation that DC editors weren't paying attention to anything he did. And to test this theory, he made Power Girl's breasts bigger and bigger with every issue, until after 8 issues, one of the DC editors finally noticed. And after that, he stopped and she was stuck with big boobs. So to all you really horny guys, girls, and MBs out there, you have this weird series of events to thank for Power Girl's physique. Except this story about Wally Wood is actually not true. Yeah, this is actually false, as if you go back and look at Power Girl's early appearances, this just isn't true, there's no growth. Instead, it wouldn't be until Bart Sears came along and started giving Power Girl more chest in the Justice League Europe comic series. Ultraman. Ultraman is the protagonist of the show Ultraman, which was released in 1966 and ran until 1967, which resulted in the massive Ultra franchise, with tons of shows and films being made. Ultraman uses human hosts to, okay, joke over, first appearing in Justice League of America issue 29 in August 1964, Ultraman is basically an alternate universe evil Superman. The very first, I think, although I could be wrong about that. When he was a kid, he was rocketed off his Krypton, which didn't blow up in his universe, and as a kid on Earth actually developed powers as he came into contact with Kryptonite. So again, he's like the opposite. Krypton didn't blow up, he gets his powers from Kryptonite, etc, etc. When he became an adult, he started calling himself Ultraman, and started up the Crime Syndicate of America, which is basically just the Justice League but evil. His powers are mostly the same as Silver Age Superman's are. He's got like the laser vision, flight, super strength, speed, etc. Though his most notable power is probably his super vision, which allowed him to see into other dimensions, which is how he got involved in the mainline DC timeline. He would eventually perish in Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 1 in April 1985, as he faced off against Anti-Monitor's antimatter wave head-on, which didn't end up well for him. Outside of a few clones of him and alternate universe versions of him, like Ultraman 2 and Antimatter Ultraman, Ultraman wouldn't be seen in comics until the New 52. First appearing in Justice League issue 23 in October 2013, this Ultraman's father, Jor-Il, sent Kal-El off of Krypton due to the planet dying, and so Kal-El landed on Earth, where he then began to become stronger as he got into contact with more and more Kryptonite. Things took a turn for the worse when he murdered his universe's Pa and Martha Kent when he was only 7 years old, burning the entire farm down. He then murdered the US president and started up the Crime Syndicate. And because DC loved his multiverse stuff, Ultraman and the Crime Syndicate have come into contact with the mainline DC universe several times since. Power-wise, this Ultraman has most of the standard Superman abilities. Ultraman has become a fairly popular Superman villain, showing up in Smallville, Crisis on Two Earths, DC Universe Online, the World's Greatest Super Friends, and even LEGO DC Supervillains. The Superman Curse. People claim that if you play Superman in live action or you work on a live action Superman project, some really bad things are going to happen to you or your loved ones. There's a ton of people out there who claim that this curse has impacted a lot of people. For example, there's George Reeves, who played Superman in the Adventures of Superman TV show from 1952 to 1958, who sadly ended his own life in 1959. Christopher Reeve, who played Superman in the original film series, was paralyzed due to a horseback riding incident in 1995 and died in 2004 due to a heart failure. Kirk Allen, who played Superman in some 1940s serials that I'll talk about a little bit later, developed Alzheimer's later in life and passed away in 1999. Lee Quigley, who played Superman as a baby in the 1978 film, died of a heart attack in 1991 at only 14 years old. Marlon Brando's son killed his half-sister's boyfriend, and Marlon Brando's daughter ended her own life in 1985. Margot Kidder, who played Lois Lane in the original film series, went missing in 1996 for several days. And Allison Mack, who played Chloe Sullivan on Smallville, went on to do things I don't think I can mention without being demonetized. So, just Google her name and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. Now, is this curse real? I mean, Henry Cavill, Dean Cain, Brandon Routh, Tom Welling, and Tyler Hoechlin are all doing fine, so probably not. I mean, Superman as a character has been around since the 1930s. So of course some bad and tragic things are going to happen to some people who work on the media surrounding the character. It's almost been 100 years since then. So yeah, over a course of almost 100 years, some bad and tragic things are probably going to happen to some people, unfortunately. Deleted scenes. Like with every film, the Superman films all have deleted scenes. And like the Batman and Spider-Man icebergs, I'll be listing a few deleted scenes from each of the Superman films, and films involving Superman characters. Like, for example, I'll mention a scene from Justice League, but only if it has something to do with Superman or Lois or Lex Luthor or something. also only doing live-action films. For Superman 1978, most of the film's deleted scenes were later added back into the film in various DVD and Blu-ray releases, under a Director's Cut Extended Edition label. Anyways, some of the deleted scenes include Richard Donner getting a cameo appearance where he tells Clark Kent, "Well, that'll be the day when a man can fly." Superman faces off against some of Lex Luthor's weapons when trying to get into his lair, including flamethrowers and ice machines. Clark Kent has a talk with his dad after rescuing Air Force One. Various scenes of Clark traveling through the North Pole. Superman saves some Girl Scouts at the Hollywood sign. While carrying Jimmy Olsen, Superman stops in midair and tells Jimmy to take a picture of the dam. And finally, the Kryptonian Council hires a executioner to kill Jor-El to keep him from launching Baby Superman. As for the theatrical cut of Superman 2, a scene where Superman flies past a jet, which surprises the pilots, was cut. A scene where Zod orders Nan to murder a kid by throwing a siren at his head after telling everybody that nobody will leave the town was cut. Pretty grim. A scene in which Lois Lane pulls a nightgown out of her purse. A scene where Zod shoots a portrait of Richard Nixon a bunch was cut. And finally, a scene in which Jimmy Olsen bites Nan's hand after he destroys his camera. This doesn't go too well for him considering that Nan's a Kryptonian, so Jimmy almost shatters his teeth. For Superman 3, a scene in which Frank Oz makes a cameo was cut, where he plays a brain surgeon. There was a scene in which Vera is trying to read a book about computers, but can't, due to the sounds of Superman having sex in the other room. There was also a scene in which Jimmy and Clark spot a fire while arriving in Smallville. And finally, there was a brief scene set in Alaska where two oilmen discover there's no oil coming out of the pipeline. As for the Supergirl film that everybody forgets, there was a scene in which Supergirl cuts her hair using laser vision that was cut. The protest scene originally had a woman being killed by being turned into an ice statue, causing all the protesters to cower in fear. And finally, there was a scene in which Supergirl declares to Selena that she only bows to truth and justice. For Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, a scene in which Clark Kent visits his family's grave was cut. The Metro Club date sequence also had a few cut moments, like a woman coming on to Nuclear Man, only to discover that he's not human. Finally, there was also a scene in which the first Nuclear Man fell instantly in love with Lacey while at the Metro Club. For Superman Returns, the film would have originally opened with Superman traveling to Krypton in an enormous crystal-like ship. There, he traveled through the remains of the planet, searching for any sign of life, but finds none. He's also made extremely sick because of the kryptonite in the area. There was also a scene in which Perry White tells Superman that Lois Lane is missing. The flashbacks to Clark's childhood were also greatly extended, including one scene of him floating in the barn. Ben Hubbard, the dude that Martha Kent is dating, is almost removed from the film entirely, outside of a few scenes. There's even a deleted scene where Martha and Ben tell Clark that they're moving out of Smallville and getting married. For Man of Steel, there was a scene in which Pa Kent takes Clark hunting for deer. There was also a scene in which Clark's parents bring him into a pediatrician because his powers were developing. The doctor plays sounds in Clark's ear, which causes Baby Soups to cry out and shatter all the windows of the building. A scene in which Lois Lane gets interrogated by the FBI was cut, and there was a scene featuring Zod attacking multiple cities on Earth that was cut. For Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, a good chunk of these, if not all of them, were added back into the film in the Ultimate Edition. Some of these scenes included Superman and Lex Luthor's talk in the scout ship being extended, a scene featuring Lex Luthor contacting Steppenwolf was cut, and there was a scene in which Superman was searching for Martha and had to ignore multiple other crimes and cries for help in the process to find Martha. Kinda reminds me of that one time Spider-Man did pretty much just this. For Justice League 2017, there's a scene in which Superman is looking at all of his various costumes in the Fortress of Solitude. Here, we'd see some Kryptonian battle armor, the black suit, and a more colorful version of the Man of Steel suit. A variation of this scene was included later in the Snyder Cut. There were also a few lines between Superman and Cyborg that were cut, but that's pretty much it that we know of. For Shazam, it's not really a deleted scene, but I should mention how Henry Cavill was originally going to play Superman in the film. However, he was unable to make the cameo appearance due to Henry Cavill being unavailable for filming. Though there are rumors that the real reason was that Henry Cavill's agent asked for way too much money for Henry Cavill to appear in the film. And when Henry Cavill found out that his agent asked for some ridiculous amount of money, he was pretty mad, understandably so. For the Snyder Cut, I actually couldn't find anything involving Superman, Lois, or Lex. There's a few scenes in the Snyder Cut that were cut that I mentioned in the second Batman Iceberg, so if you're interested in those, go check that out. And finally, for Black Adam, originally, Superman's cameo in the film was shot just like his appearance in Shazam, meaning that he wouldn't say anything and you wouldn't see his face. And, Henry Cavill wouldn't be there. This was changed fairly late into the film's production, due to Dwayne Johnson reportedly demanding Warner Bros. To use Henry Cavill. So it was refilmed. Which, thank God, people would be pretty mad if they did another head-down cameo. Superman Smashes the Klan. Released from October 2019 to February 2020, and written by Gene Luen Yang, Superman Smashes the Klan is basically what it sounds like. Set in 1946, Superman battles the KKK, who are terrorizing a Chinese-American family and several African Americans in Metropolis. There's also this dude named Atom Man, who's a German soldier seeking revenge on the US for its role in World War II. This comic miniseries was loosely based on a story arc from the Adventures of Superman radio show titled The Clan of the Fiery Cross, which aired in 1946. This radio program was extremely notable as it dealt a massive blow to the KKK in the northern United States. This story arc was influenced by Stetson Kennedy, a human rights activist who infiltrated the KKK to expose them. This really ticked the KKK off, as because of the episodes, they had a sharp decline in recruitment. But anyways, Superman Smashes the Klan is a pretty good read. It was also pretty successful financially, and even served as inspiration for an episode of Superman and Lois, with the Atom Man showing up to fight Supes. Superman Lives. Superman Lives is not just the most well-known cancelled Superman film, but it's also probably one of the most well-known cancelled films ever. Originally starting out as the film Superman Reborn, which I'll talk about a bit more later, Superman Lives was a film set to be released in the late 90s, around 1998 to 1999. The film went through a lot of rewrites, but the most well-known plot of the film was done by Kevin Smith. The film's plots had Superman battling Doomsday, Brainiac, and Lex Luthor, which would eventually lead to Superman dying and being resurrected by the Eradicator. And so, Superman, now wearing a robotic suit created by the Eradicator, defeats the villains and saves the day. Also, there'd be a giant spider he'd fight at some points, because for some reason when Kevin Smith pitched the film to John Peters, a film producer that was trying to make a Superman film throughout the 1990s, John Peters insisted that Kevin Smith put a giant spider in it. Peters also requested several more ideas, like Brainiac fighting a polar bear in the Fortress of Solitude, Brainiac gifting Lex Luthor a space dog, and Brainiac would be given a sidekick described as being a gay R2-D2 with attitude. Yeah, he had some real ideas. I can't say they were good ideas, but they were ideas. Did I mention that Superman also couldn't fly in this film because John Peters thought it looked silly? Future rewrites would change some elements of the film, like the villains. For example, after a certain rewrite, instead of Doomsday, Brainiac, and Lex Luthor, it was going to be Lexiac, an amalgamation of Brainiac and Lex Luthor. The Eradicator would also be written out completely, and Superman would just be resurrected by the power of K, a natural force representing the spirit of Krypton. This film was eventually cancelled in 2000 due to a variety of reasons. One of them was how pretty much everyone involved with the project was just leaving, including Nicolas Cage, who was set to play Superman in the film. As for other actors attached, Chris Rock was casted as Jimmy Olsen, Christopher Walken, Jim Carrey, Jason Lee, and Gary Oldman were all being considered for Brainiac. Sandra Bullock, Courtney Cox, and Jillian Moore were all considered for Lois Lane. David Hyde Pierce was considered for the Eradicator. Jack Nicholson and Kevin Spacey were also considered for Lex Luthor, with the latter eventually playing him in Superman Returns. And Famke Janssen was considered for Mercy Graves. A lot of what we know about this film comes from the 2015 documentary, The Death of Superman Lives. What happened? Cyborg Superman. First appearing in Adventures of Superman issue 465 in April 1990, originally Cyborg Superman was a man named Hank Henshaw, an astronaut who took part in a mission on a Lexcorp space shuttle named the Excalibur. Hank was just chilling out with his wife and two friends when suddenly some cosmic radiation hit the shuttle and did some pretty wacky things to the four of them. One of them was turned into a being of pure cosmic radiation, and the other turned into a creature made of rock and metal. At first, it seemed like Hank and his wife got off fine, with no side effects. That was until Hank's body started to rapidly decay, and his wife started phasing into an alternate dimension. Hank would ask Superman for help, and the two were able to save Terry, but they weren't able to save Hank in time, and so he died. Except not really, as his mind somehow transferred into Lexcorp's computers. Using his new abilities, he built himself a new body, showed up at his wife's door and was like, "I'm alive," and she was like, "I'm not," and died via shock. And that's when Henry learned that he and his team were hit by radiation due to Superman throwing the Eradicator into the sun. And so he blamed Superman for all that had happened to him, and became the supervillain Cyborg Superman. As for Cyborg Superman's abilities, he uses a robotic Kryptonian hybrid body, which gives him most of Superman's abilities. Also, because he's a robot ghost thing, he can transfer his mind into any piece of machinery, and can even transform machinery into whatever he wants. After the New 52 reboot, Cyborg Supes would show back up again in Team 7 issue 5 in April 2013, and continued to be a menace to the DC universe. By the way, I just love how the DC Wiki lists his jobs as astronaut, mass murderer, and intergalactic terrorist. What's the pay for those? Also, if you feel bad for Cyborg Superman, just remember, this dude ripped his dead wife's corpse in half and nuked Coast City, so he's a pretty bad dude. He's become a pretty popular Superman villain and has appeared in various media like Supergirl, Reign of Superman, Lego Batman 3, and Legion of Superheroes, a show I keep forgetting exists. Injustice. The Injustice series is an alternate continuity in DC's vast multiverse. Created for the 2013 video game Injustice Gods Among Us, in this universe, Superman has a bit of a bro moment when he accidentally kills Lois Lane and their unborn child due to a scheme from Joker. Afterwards, Superman kills Joker and begins a new fascist dictatorship across the world as he makes war illegal and has everyone who commits a murder or another crime at that level killed. Superman is actually able to convince quite a decent amount of heroes and villains to his cause, like Hal Jordan, The Flash, Cyborg, Wonder Woman, Black Adam, Lobo, Cheetah, Sinestro, Damian Wayne, Raven, and Shazam. However, Batman disagrees with all this, and creates his own underground rebel faction consisting of characters like Martian Manhunter, Green Arrow, Black Canary, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, Batwoman, Lex Luthor, Batgirl, and Zatanna. The game's main plot had Batman's faction, the Insurgency, bring over a bunch of heroes from another universe to help them beat Superman. They succeed and the day is saved. Until Injustice 2, where they're forced to work with Superman and his regime to fight off Brainiac, and Gorilla Grodd's new faction, the Society. Superman in this continuity is pretty brutal. For example, he beats Green Arrow to death in front of Pa and Martha Kent, murdered Shazam once he started questioning the regime, and in the non-canon Superman ending to Injustice 2, he uses Brainiac's mind control technology to force Batman and the rest of the Insurgency to join his side as mindless slaves. The Injustice continuity is pretty popular, and so far as 2 console games, 2 mobile games, 2 different prequel comic series, an animated film adaptation that apparently everybody hates, I haven't seen it, and a crossover comic with He-Man that I assume isn't canon, but kind of confirms that He-Man will probably be a guest character in Injustice 3. Superman Flyby. This is another canceled Superman film from 2004. Written by J.J. Abrams, Superman Flyby was going to be the weirdest Superman film ever made, if it was made. The plot would have Jor-El sent to prison during a civil war in Krypton, and have Kal-El sent off of Earth, and the whole standard Superman origin story happens. Except Krypton doesn't blow up. Yeah, like one of the most crucial elements of the origin story, it just doesn't happen. Eventually in the film, Superman would then reveal himself to the world, which would cause 4 Kryptonians to arrive on Earth to kill him. Superman's able to put up a good fight, but is eventually killed. He then goes to Kryptonian Heaven, which is different than normal Heaven apparently, where he meets his father, who we find out Avenged Endgamed himself in prison. He then gets resurrected, beats up the 4 Kryptonians, and then flies off to Krypton in a spaceship. All Transformers Age of Extinction style. Joseph McGinty Nicole was also brought onto the film to direct, and the project was on, until 2004 where it was cancelled, due to Warner Bros. Wanting to film in Australia, while MCG wanted to film in the United States. Warner Bros. Wanted to film in Australia because they would save them $25 million, but MCG said no, because he was afraid of flying, so he didn't want to film there. No, really, Superman Flyby didn't happen because someone was afraid of flying. Bryan Singer was then brought on board, and Superman Returns happened. As for the cast of the film, Jason Behr, Henry Cavill, Matt Bomer, Ashton Kutcher, Joel Egerton, and Jared Padalecki were all in talks to play Superman. Scarlett Johansson, Kerry Russell, and Amy Adams were in talks for Lois Lane. Anthony Hopkins was in talks for Jor-El. Ralph Fiennes, Johnny Depp, and Robert Downey Jr. were in talks for Lex Luthor, and Shia LaBeouf was in talks for Jimmy Olsen. Now, 2 names probably stuck out to you: Henry Cavill and Amy Adams. Yes, these 2, who would go on to play Superman and Lois Lane in the DCEU, actually had a chance to play the characters 7 years before the DCEU began. Henry Cavill even filmed test footage as Superman. Evil Superman. So in the past decade or so, there's been a growing number of characters in media that fall under the evil Superman archetype. Some notable examples include Superman being evil in Injustice, Superman being brainwashed in that new Rocksteady game coming out next year that I can't say the name of or I'll get demonetized, Nightmare Sequence Superman from Batman v Superman and the Snyder Cut, Homelander from The Boys, Omni-Man from Invincible, the entire film Brightburn. Hell, Superman even gets brainwashed in Supergirl at one point. Because of this wave of evil Supermen, many people have started getting tired of the whole archetype, which is why shows like Superman and Lois have been getting pretty positive attention due to it being a live-action Superman that's more faithful to the classic version. Now, I'm not saying like which is better, I'm just saying that there's a growing trend in evil Superman-like characters, and that some people have started getting tired of them. Superboy Prime. First appearing in DC Comics Presents issue 87 in November of 1985, Superboy Prime, aka Kal-El, is from the Prime universe, plus the name, which is a universe where all superheroes are just comic book characters, except for him. He wasn't always a villain, as originally he was just an alternate Superboy, but after Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed his universe, he was sent into another dimension, where over time his morality was twisted, which eventually led him to believe that his home world, Earth Prime, was the only Earth that should exist in the multiverse, and that he was the only one worthy enough to be Superboy. And so, he began his travels throughout the multiverse, causing mayhem and murder. For example, one of the universes he traveled to was Earth 15, where he murdered that universe's Superman, along with his wife and unborn kid, and the Justice League, and then the planet itself. His murderous rampage across the multiverse has led him to face off against a ton of heroes and even villains. Power-wise, Superboy Prime has your standard Superman abilities, but more. For example, Superboy Prime is immune to kryptonite and magic. He's also got 2 different solar armors he's worn, these being powerful armors that constantly feed him yellow solar energy to maximize his powers. Besides being extremely powerful, Superboy Prime is also well known for punching reality. Yes, during Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superboy Prime punched the barrier of reality, which caused some things to change in a ton of continuities. This has become a fairly common explanation for fixing errors and retcons in DC Comics. Two more things I want to mention. He once carved a Superman logo onto his chest with his fingernails because, edgy. And despite being a very well-known Superman and Justice League villain, he hasn't ever actually appeared in any animated material or video game. Superman and the Mole Men. Released in 1951, Superman and the Mole Men was the first ever Superman film and the first film based on the DC character. Yes, there were serials in the 1940s, but this was the first feature film. Starring George Reeves as the Man of Steel, this film sees Superman battling mole people after Clark and Lois discover Silsbee, Texas, a small town that has the world's deepest oil well. And in order to create that well, they had to drill into the earth, and that really ticked off the mole men, so they began to attack the people of Silsbee. It's interesting that the first Superman film has a film original villain and doesn't even take place in Metropolis. In fact, Superman and Lois Lane are the only Superman characters to appear in the film. The film was released to gauge interest in a live-action Superman show, and when the film did pretty well, the series Adventures of Superman was created, with George Reeves returning to the role. The film even returned to the show as the two-part episode The Unknown People, which was just an abridged version of the film. Superman 64. Superman, The New Superman Adventures, aka Superman 64, was a game released in 1999 for the Nintendo 64, and you know the rest. No, really, even if you're not a Superman fan, you probably know about this game, due to it being well known as one of the worst video games ever made. The game's plot has some of Superman's friends being trapped in a virtual reality version of Metropolis, thanks to Lex Luthor and Brainiac. And so, Superman has to enter the virtual world, rescue his friends, and defeat Lex Luthor, Parasite, Brainiac, Mala, Metallo, and Darkseid. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that Darkseid was in this game. The game had a very troubled production, as the developers of the game, Titus Interactive, were constantly being messed with by Warner Bros. And DC Comics. Despite the game being a commercial success, it was heavily criticized and mocked for its poor graphics, terrible controls, numerous bugs, boring and repetitive gameplay, and its kryptonite fog used to help the game's frame rate. Also the rings. You flew through a lot of rings. Because of the horrible reception, the game's PlayStation version was cancelled in 2000, though this version was apparently going to be better as many of the game's bugs would have been fixed. While this version of the game wasn't finished, you could actually play the final build of it before it was cancelled, as it was uploaded to the internet on November 28th, 2020. Val-Zod. First appearing in Earth 2 issue 19 in March 2014, Val-Zod is a relatively recent addition to the Superman family. Originally from Krypton along with Superman and Power Girl, Val-Zod was launched off Krypton as a child, and when he arrived on Earth, he was taken in by a man named Terry Sloan, who turns Val-Zod into a recluse by keeping him locked away in an underground lead-lined bunker. It took a long time for Val-Zod to be found by anyone, but he would eventually be found and set free, only for Val to have a serious panic attack due to him spending so much of his life indoors in an enclosed space. He'd then be taught by Lois Lane, who's Red Tornado in this universe, and other DC heroes on how to use his powers in order to fight and defeat Brutal, an evil Darkseid-created clone of Superman. However, there was one problem with this plan. You see, during Val-Zod's trip to Earth as a kid, he was taught by messages from his parents to be a pacifist, so Val-Zod wasn't really super into fighting Brutal. But after the death of Red Arrow and some talks from Jimmy Olsen and Dr. Fate, he finally decided to rise up and become Superman. And so he stopped Brutal, and the day was saved. Kinda. Shortly afterwards, some more things happened, and the Earth blew up eventually. It's a whole big thing. Anyways, he'd go on to join the Wonders of the World, and even crossed over with other DC realities. When it comes to powers, Val-Zod has most of Superman's standard abilities, like super hearing, heat vision, flight, X-ray vision, superhuman strength, etc. Since his first appearance, Val-Zod has sadly not made any appearances in media outside of the comics. As of now, that is. It was announced in 2021 that Michael B. Jordan is developing a Val-Zod HBO Max series set in the DCEU. He's also starring as Val-Zod, so when this show comes out, I'm sure it'll be great. I mean, Michael B. Jordan's a great actor, so I mean, how could this go wrong? Well, I mean, it might just not come out, as Warner Bros. Discovery does not really seem to be big on HBO Max projects anymore. Rocksteady Superman game hoax. In 2020, images began spreading online of a potential new Superman video game being developed by Rocksteady. Fans were pretty excited for a new Superman game, but it wasn't meant to be, as later that year it was revealed that this was simply a hoax. However, shortly after this, it was revealed that Rocksteady at one point had actually pitched a Superman game to Warner Bros. Unfortunately, Warner Bros. Reportedly didn't even seriously consider the pitch and rejected it outright. As of right now, no reason has ever been leaked as to why they didn't consider it, so we can really only speculate. Time travel powers. One of the most talked about moments from the original Superman film series is the scene where Superman travels back in time by reversing the Earth's rotation. It's a pretty ridiculous power and scene, but a lot of people make the mistake of saying that this power was created for the films. Sure, the rotation of the planet part was created for the films, but Silver Age Superman actually did have the power to travel back in time. For example, in Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane issue 20, released in October 1960, we see Superman getting fed up with Lois Lane trying to figure out his identity. So he travels back in time to right before he applied for the Daily Planet in order to become a disc jockey on a radio station. This doesn't really end up too well for him, as even in this new timeline, Lois Lane is still trying to figure out his identity. So he travels back in time again to fix the timeline. This isn't even the only time Superman's done this. In Superman issue 141, released in November of 1960, Superman accidentally flies back in time to when Krypton wasn't blown up. One final example I'll give is in Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane issue 48, released in April 1964, where Superman's like, "Alright Lois, I'll tell you my secret identity, but only if you can figure out the identity I take in 3 different places in history." Pink Kryptonite. So there's a lot of different variations of Kryptonite, but probably the weirdest one is Pink Kryptonite. Pink Kryptonite never makes any appearances in any pieces of media. However, it is mentioned once in Supergirl issue 789, released in February 2003. This story is very notable for 2 things. The main one here is that Supergirl and Superman get married. Don't worry, they're not related in this story. This is actually Supergirl from another universe where she's not related to Superman. It's a weird thing. But anyways, in this story, there's one panel that shows Lois Lane asking Supergirl, what kind of effect has Pink Kryptonite had on Superman? To which we quickly realize it makes Superman gay for a period of time. What a weird comic.
You're watching Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
This Power Blast ketchup tastes awesome. I wonder where they got it.
There's an energy flux on planet Bendown.
I'm getting a reading. It appears to be a rare type of spicy and tasty ketchup.
Right. Power Blast Ketchup is now at Burger King. Now in every big kid's meal, you can get one of your favorite Justice League toys and watch Superman roll, Batman rise, and Wonder Woman lasso. There's 8 toys in all, so you can start upholding truth and justice at Burger King today.
We now return to Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Jimmy Olsen marries an ape. In Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, issue 98, released in December of 1966, Jimmy Olsen and Clark Kent are traveling through an African jungle, where they discover a film crew making a film. And they're like, well, that's pretty cool. And the director's like, yeah, it is pretty cool. We're also giving the locals fake plastic jewelry as payment for working with us. He's a real stand-up guy, it seems. Anyways, during the filming of their latest movie, a gorilla that the locals worship walks into the set and falls in love with Jimmy Olsen. The gorilla, named Bruna, kidnaps Jimmy Olsen and then attempts to marry him. And so Superman comes in to save the day, but then realizes that the locals would probably get mad if he beat the crap out of a gorilla. So he tells Jimmy, you need to get married to that gorilla. I'll think of a way to get us out of this mess later. Superman then dresses up like a witch doctor and then attempts to get Jimmy to marry a gorilla, and succeeds. Should probably also mention here that Bruna isn't even like a anthro, like Candy Kong kind of character. She's just a normal ass gorilla. So the two are married, which means now Jimmy's gotta think of something to get him out of this mess. Getting a brain blast, Jimmy shows Bruna a movie that has a gorilla throwing a dude off a cliff, which makes Bruna want to throw him off a cliff, so she does. This is apparently some form of divorce, so now he's like free. Superman is able to save him from falling to his death, and the two fly back off to the Metropolis. Should also mention here that Bruna the gorilla would actually make another appearance. She'd cameo in Batman Brave and the Bold of all things. Cancelled Smallville spin-offs. Before the Arrowverse, there was Smallville, a 10-season-long origin story for Superman that has its fans, but it's been kind of forgotten about today. It kind of got overshadowed by the Goliath that is the Arrowverse. However, that wasn't always going to be the case. During its decade-long run, two potential spin-offs were considered, creating a Smallville-verse. The first would be a show focused on Green Arrow. Justin Hartley would continue to play the character in the show, but this show would never end up happening. Not because the CW didn't want to make it, they really did. I mean, hell, they made a Green Arrow show a few years later, and look what that started. This show didn't happen mainly because Justin Hartley refused to star in a spin-off because he didn't want to steal the spotlight from Smallville. Though maybe he changed his mind or something, because eventually there were talks for a Justice League spin-off show where Green Arrow would lead the team. And unlike the other show, this one actually made it into early development. But it wasn't meant to be and was cancelled. And before somebody asks about the Aquaman spin-off show, technically the Aquaman pilot that was filmed wasn't going to be a spin-off of Smallville, as Aquaman was recasted in this, and one of the Smallville's creators even said that this was a different version of the Aquaman legend, so it's technically not a spin-off. That's why I didn't mention... Well, okay, wait, I guess I still mentioned it. Oops. Superman and the Batman. The Batman is a very polarizing cartoon. Some love it, some hate it. But one thing about the show that a lot of people seem to forget is that Superman was actually revealed to exist in the show's continuity during its 5th season. An interesting thing about this incarnation of the character is that he was actually going to get his own show. At least according to rumors. In 2006, there were a lot of rumors going around that Superman would be getting a spin-off show, though these rumors were not exactly shut down, but they weren't confirmed in an interview with Dwayne Capazzi. Though a year later, Superman would make his appearance in The Batman, so this has led some people to believe that maybe these episodes were intended to be a backdoor pilot for the show. Seeing as this show actually never happened, I think it's safe to say that these rumors probably weren't true. Superman 3, Supergirl. The Superman 3 we ended up getting in 1983 wasn't the original version of the film. In fact, it was very different from the original treatment. Written in the early 80s, this third installment in the series, called Superman 3, Supergirl, would introduce Supergirl, Brainiac, and Mr. Name I Can't Pronounce into the franchise. The plot of the film had Supergirl landing on a planet controlled by Brainiac. There, he'd fall in love with her, and she would be like, no thank you, and so she bailed to Earth. Whereupon landing on Earth, she'd become a hero. Superman would then pretend to be a villain in order to test and see if she was truly a hero. And only when she proves that she's a hero, they fall in love. Brainiac then arrives on Earth and sees that Supergirl is in a relationship with Supes, so he gets really mad and uses his powers to mess with Superman's personality to make him evil. He'd then tell Supergirl that he would stop messing with him if she married him. She refuses, Superman is broken out of his control, and the day is saved. The two would then get married either in this film or the next. They didn't decide on that yet. Warner Brothers rejected the treatment, though they would reuse certain plot details for other material. For example, Supergirl would end up getting her own film in 1984, and Superman having an evil persona would be used in the Superman 3 we actually ended up getting. Superman: The Dark Side. Releasing from August 1998 to October of the same year, and written by John Francis Moore, Superman: The Dark Side is a 3-part Elseworld story that answers the age-old question, what if Superman landed on Apokolips instead of Earth? Well, it's more like what if Superman as a baby was taken to Apokolips, as the ship he was in was intercepted and brought there. It wasn't like Jor-El was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna send my infant son to Apokolips. That sounds like a good idea. Anyways, upon arriving at Apokolips, Darkseid took great interest in him and raised him as his own son, and eventually over time, Kal-El became his most powerful warrior, even killing Kalibak in a gladiator match. He'd then lead a mission to New Genesis to wipe out the New Gods, but there he was sent to Earth by the High Father. There, on Earth, he'd meet Lois Lane and accidentally bring the Apokolips and New God War to Earth. This would allow humans to take New God technology and use it for themselves, as Lex Luthor captured Kal-El with his tech, only for Darkseid to then show up and teleport him to Granny Goodness, who proceeds to torture him to death. Darkseid then tells Kal-El about his plan to use the anti-life equation, and that Kal-El is literally a weapon. Turns out that Jor-El is a really bad dude in this continuity, as he recorded a message telling Kal to rebuild the Kryptonian Empire and lay waste to all that oppose him. Kal-El isn't really a fan of this and turns against Darkseid to save Earth. And so, with the help of the surviving New Gods, Kal-El becomes Superman and defeats Darkseid and his empire. He then marries Big Barda and returns to Apokolips to rebuild the planet into a free world. Overall, it's a pretty interesting story that I'm surprised hasn't been revisited. You would think with the recent evil Superman archetype craze, we'd get some kind of loose adaptation of the story in Supergirl or something. To my knowledge, the only time this universe has ever been revisited was in promotional art in a Wizard magazine, where you can just barely see this version of Superman fighting a Green Lantern in a multiverse battle. Novels. So DC is most known for its heroes appearing in comics, movies, animation, video games, and TV shows. However, they have dipped their toes into the world of novels. Take Superman, for example. He's got quite a lot of novels. There's Last Son of Krypton, Miracle Monday, It's Superman, Doomsday and Beyond, and Lois and Clark, a Superman novel. There is also a novelization of the death of Superman's story arc, along with a ton of novels in the Smallville continuity. Pretty sure most of these books aren't canon, but I mean, they do exist, so if you're interested, you can check them out. And then, of course, there's the adaptations of Superman films, like Superman Returns, Man of Steel, Quest for Peace, Batman v Superman, etc. But yeah, overall, there's a lot of Superman books out there. Cancelled DCEU Supergirl film. Alright, so I really hope this entry ages poorly. In 2018, it was reported that a Supergirl film set in the DCEU was in development, with Oren Uzel writing the script. And that was it for a while. No information would be leaked or announced until February 2021, where Sasha Calle was casted as Supergirl in The Flash, and a Supergirl film. All was going good until Warner Bros. Discovery canceled Batgirl, and then began canceling a lot of projects, with it being reported that development of the Supergirl film was coming to an end. Maybe if audiences and critics really like her performance in The Flash, they'll go back on this decision, but as of right now, it's not looking too good for this film. Superman makes Lois Lane feel guilty. In Superman issue 210, released in September 1968, Clark Kent gets rejected by Lois Lane, yet again, and so he's had enough. He's gonna get revenge on her for not wanting to date him, and so he disguises himself as a fortune teller named Astar, and when Lois Lane meets with him, that Clark Kent is going to Avengers Endgame himself because she rejected him. And then Superman fakes his own death and puts the blame solely on Lois, saying that, you're responsible, you're the one that drove him to do this. And, naturally she's pretty upset by this. She's so upset that Superman actually starts feeling guilty that he tricked Lois Lane into, thinking that she caused Clark Kent to drown himself. And so Clark reveals he's okay and the day is saved. The day is better. Microwave Man. First appearing in Action Comics issue 487, released in September 1978, Microwave Man, aka Louis Paget, was an old man who spent 40 years of his life traveling the galaxy with aliens. Before his trip with aliens, he was a minor supervillain called Microwave Man, who claimed that he was the first super scientific criminal, though he would eventually retire to travel the stars. After spending all these years with the aliens, he returned to Earth, where he once again became Microwave Man and had his alien buddies give him back his youth for just a few hours. And then he turned back to being old, right? No, then he dies. Yeah, whatever technique they used, it kills him after a few hours, so this is a one-way trip. Anyways, now that he's youthful again, he challenged Superman in a test of strength to prove that he was the strongest being in the universe. And so Superman was like, okay, sure, I'll fight you. But before the fight got really serious, the aliens contacted Superman and told him basically, hey man, our friend here is dying and he just wants to like beat you in a fight. Could you like let him beat you? He's gonna die in like an hour anyways, so thanks. So Superman allows Microwave Man to defeat him, and yeah, he dies shortly afterwards. The aliens then return, take his body, and send it adrift in space. When it comes to his powers, Microwave Man had a couple of them. He could fly, and had the power to absorb and shoot out microwave energy. Superman Battle for Metropolis. In the early 2000s, a Superman video game titled Superman Battle for Metropolis was in development for the Game Boy Color. Developed by Neon Studios, the game's production was going pretty well, until DC and Warner Bros. Saw the project, and they weren't impressed by it. And so, shortly after that, they had the game cancelled, without the game even being announced to the public. Nearly 2 decades later, on December 28, 2019, a prototype of the game was discovered and dumped online, so now anyone can play it. Though it's very buggy and it crashes quite often. There's also just things in this game that don't work, like the password screen, the credits, or even the options menu. As for the gameplay, it's a 2D beat-em-up with the occasional flying section. Think about this though. This game was cancelled without being announced, and wasn't discovered until almost 20 years. Imagine what other video games out there were cancelled before being announced that we have yet to know about. The Adventures of Seinfeld and Superman. In 2004, 2 short films were released to promote American Express. These shorts followed the lives of Jerry Seinfeld and Superman just hanging out in New York City. Superman in this is voiced by Patrick Warburton of Joe Swanson fame. These shorts were originally released online, though they would eventually be aired on TBS later that year. Not really much else to say about these 2 shorts, outside of some weird lore stuff. In this continuity, Superman has time travel powers. Green Lantern also exists. Not sure which one, but one of them does. Superman is also really big into musicals, and gets really annoyed when somebody asks him where he came up with the name Superman. It's a strange little micro-continuity, and I'm surprised they didn't make any more of these. Although, there is this image. I believe it first appeared in a newspaper in 2004, but this shot isn't from either short. So my initial thought was like maybe it's from a scrapped commercial? Though at the same time, Superman seems to be drawn a little bit differently in this, so it was probably just made for the paper. Superman Returns 2. Before Superman Returns was even released, Warner Bros. Announced that a sequel to the film was in development, with Bryan Singer returning to direct. Everything was looking good for this sequel, until the film came out. Superman Returns didn't do poorly, but it didn't do great at the box office. It made $341 million, which disappointed Warner Bros. As they expected the film to easily make $500 million. But they still planned on making the film, with filming set to begin in 2007. But then Bryan Singer left for a bit to work on the film Valkyrie, so filming was pushed back to 2008. But then the sequel's writers left, and then the 2007-2008 Writers Guild of America strike happened. And it's not surprising to see that Warner Bros. Just decided to cancel the film entirely and reboot the franchise a few years later, which resulted in Man of Steel. So what was Superman Returns 2 going to have in it? Well, we know that the main plot was going to have Superman battling Brainiac, along with some other surviving Kryptonians. Also, it was discussed early on that Bizarro may appear in the film, but as far as I can tell, no script with him in it has ever been leaked. Metallo would have also appeared in the film, though he wouldn't be a main player and would kind of be a joke character. He would show up in the opening action sequence and then get taken out by Superman, never to appear in the film again. Superman Returns 2 was also going to have Superman killing his son. No, that's not a joke. You see, from the leaked scripts, it turns out that Brainiac was going to arrive on Earth and begin causing numerous wars. When Superman tries to stop him, turns out that Brainiac is actually an AI that destroyed Krypton, and that the body that Brainiac was using was just a clone body the AI was possessing. He then finds out that Brainiac has chosen Superman's son as his new host, and so he begins to take him over. This causes the kid to rapidly age, and then Superman has to kill him in order to put an end to Brainiac. You know how Superman killing Zod in Man of Steel was pretty controversial at the time? This would have been that times 100. Superman, War of the Worlds. Released in 1998, Superman War of the Worlds is exactly what you think it is. It's an Elseworld story about the Martians from War of the Worlds landing in Metropolis in 1938, where Superman battles them, though he does get captured fairly early in the invasion, and then is studied by Martians for 3 weeks. They did this with the help of Lex Luthor, who switched sides during the war because he's like, I think humanity is doomed. The Martians will take over, and then I'll be the one human remaining. He's also creating a cure for the Martians, as if you know anything about War of the Worlds, you'll know that the Martians don't really do well on Earth's atmosphere. But then, the Martians turn on Lex Luthor, and so he helps Superman escape, along with Lois Lane, who the Martians were keeping prisoner to make sure that Superman didn't try and fight them. Lois then becomes really xenophobic towards Superman, saying that she doesn't want another alien to ever touch her. And Superman's like, yeah, I get it, man. That's fine. That's fair. Superman then battles some more Martians and does pretty well, until he doesn't, and is mortally wounded by all the Martian weapons. Should probably mention here that Superman in this story isn't as powerful as he is in the main DC universe. He's more like he was in the 1930s, which yes, means that he can't actually fly. He can only jump really high. And so he dies. But Lex Luthor is able to figure out a way to kill the rest of the Martians. The Martians then lose the war, and the world rebuilds, with a statue of Superman being built by the League of Nations. It's a sad story, but I mean, hey, the Martians killed Hitler and Stalin, so that's cool. But you know what's funny? This isn't even the first time Superman, War of the Worlds, and Hitler have crossed paths. You see, in Superman issue 62, released in January of 1950, Martians who admired Hitler and his regime, that I can't say without being demonetized, kidnapped Orson Welles because of the 1938 War of the Worlds radio drama. They did this because they thought that he'd be a good propaganda minister during their eventual invasion of Earth. But Orson Welles was able to warn humanity, causing Superman to travel to Mars, save him, and stop the Martian invasion. Superman 78. Releasing from August 2021 to January 2022, Superman 78 is a miniseries written by Robert Venditti that serves as a new installment in the original Superman film series. Except it's not actually a sequel to Quest for Peace, but is instead an alternate sequel to Superman 2. So now, the original Superman film series has 3 timelines. Anyways, this story is about Superman battling Brainiac, who's trying to capture him in Metropolis. He's eventually able to capture Superman by threatening to destroy Metropolis, and so shrinks Superman down and places him in the city of Kandor, the last surviving city of Krypton. But not only does the city remain, but the people there too, including Superman's parents, Jor-El and Laura. Lex Luthor then challenges Brainiac to a battle of the minds, only for Brainiac to then just shrink Metropolis in response. Jor-El then helps Superman grow to normal size, resulting in Superman defeating Brainiac. He's then able to regrow Metropolis, but only Metropolis. And so the end of the story has him vowing to return all the cities Brainiac captured back to normal. It's a fairly simple story, and is the 3rd installment in the... well, I'm not really sure what to call it. It's the superhero last 2 digits of a year anthology? This all started in 2013 with Batman 66, a full-on series that continued the story of the 1960s Batman show. This helped inspire Batman 89, released in 2021, which served as a continuation of the first 2 Burton films. Unlike Batman 89, though, Superman 78 is actually scheduled to get a sequel miniseries at some point. Divine. First appearing in Power Girl issue 16, released in November of 2010, Divine was a clone of Power Girl. Created in Antarctica by Dr. Savani and Maxwell Lord, Divine confronted and then battled Power Girl for a little bit, until their frozen fight ended up in Maxwell Lord's underground lab. There, Maxwell would end the fight and shoot Power Girl with a gun that fired red sun energy, though because she's a clone of Power Girl, this also affected Divine. Thankfully for her, this wouldn't knock her out like it did Power Girl, because she wasn't hit directly with it. Afterwards, the villains would then leave Power Girl at the lab, and that was it. Power-wise, Divine had pretty much the exact power setup as Power Girl, due to, her being a clone. And you're probably wondering right now, why am I even talking about her? She just seems like a standard clone of Power Girl that only appeared in 4 issues? Well, I'm talking about her because she sadly debuted at the worst possible time. Like I said earlier, she first appeared in an issue of Power Girl, released in November 2010. And, she was probably going to show up again at some point. You don't, just introduce a clone of Power Girl and never use her again. But less than a year later, it was the beginning of the New 52 and everything got rebooted, meaning that whatever story they had for Divine would just never happen. It's a shame. This could have been a really cool story, but New 52 just had to happen, I guess. Superman makes an adult film. Action Comics issue 593, released in October 1987, is fairly infamous in the DC fandom because, well, as the entry name suggests, Superman almost makes an adult film. This story continues off the last issue, where the villain Sleaze, who specializes in hypnosis, captures Big Barda and makes her dance in very suggestive clothing. You see, he's trying to break her as he feeds off emotion. Superman then comes to save her, but he ends up getting captured as well. Big Barda's husband, Mr. Miracle, is then shown footage of Barda being forced to do some pretty suggestive things. The person that shows him this tape is Darkseid, who's just chilling in Mr. Miracle's house. This is a really awesome panel. He's here because he knows that Sleaze is trying to get some money to buy an army to take out Darkseid, so he wants to put an end to it, but not directly, I guess? So Mr. Miracle races off to the adult film store, where he finds Superman and Big Barda, both still under hypnosis, about to make an adult film. Turns out that Sleaze was going to get the money to buy an army by selling copies of Superman and Big Barda banging, which, I mean, fair enough, I mean, people would probably buy that. Mr. Miracle then breaks into the building, which breaks them free from Sleaze's control, and so Sleaze bails. He fakes his death and he's just gone. Superman, Mr. Miracle, and Big Barda are just kind of like, alright, let's never talk with us again, and move on with our lives. It's no wonder why this story has been called one of the worst Superman stories out there. Son of Superman. Released in November of 1999 and written by Howard Chaykin and David Tishman, Son of Superman is an Elseworld story about Superman's son, John. No, not the canon John, a different John. In this story, it's revealed that he grew up without even knowing that his father was Superman, though he would eventually find out and joins a terrorist group led by Lana Lang and Pete Ross to rescue his father, who's being held captive in an underground bunker. So why does he need to join a terrorist group? Well, because in this continuity, the US government has become insanely corrupt, and Lex Luthor has taken control of the United States and the Justice League. Upon rescuing Superman, it's then discovered that Wonder Woman is funding the terrorist group, and that Pete Ross is a pretty big loser, who gets paid off by Lex Luthor to keep his mouth shut about Superman's capture. Then Martian Manhunter shows up and pretends to be Superman while destroying the Statue of Liberty in order to frame Superman for its destruction. Yeah, it turns out that Martian Manhunter in this continuity is a bit of a loser too, because he works with Lex Luthor to capture Superman so that he would be the most powerful and beloved superhero in the world. Awesome motivation. John then battles Lex Luthor, who now has superpowers, and eventually he beats him, while Wonder Woman convinces the terrorists to turn themselves into the authorities. Martian Manhunter is defeated and then forced to exile himself to Mars, and Batman runs for president. The Justice League then retires, and John becomes a full-on superhero. It's a really weird story, but Lex Luthor looks like a pirate, so it's pretty funny. Cancelled DCAU Supergirl show. So Legion of Superheroes is a show that's often forgotten about. The show is about a young Superman being sent into the future to help fight crime with heroes from that era. However, that wasn't the original premise for the show, at least according to fans of the DCAU. You see, right around the time of the Legion of Superheroes announcement, the Legion of Superheroes themselves would make their debut in the DCAU in the Justice League Unlimited episode, Far From Home, which ends with Supergirl traveling to the future and joining the Legion of Superheroes. Because of this, people began speculating that this episode was actually intended as a backdoor pilot for the Legion of Superheroes cartoon, meaning that the show was originally supposed to be set in the DCAU, and that Supergirl would have originally been the star of it. And so, when the show eventually came out, people began speculating that during production, they just removed all the DCAU elements from the show and replaced Supergirl with Superman. This theory, or rumor, was fairly popular for a little bit, until Legion of Superheroes producer, James Tucker, stated that the show was never going to be connected with the DCAU or Supergirl. The fact that Legion of Superheroes came out around the same time as the Justice League Unlimited episode was just a really weird coincidence. So, long story short, no. There was never actually going to be a Supergirl Legion of Superheroes spin-off show. It was just fan rumors based on a weird coincidence. Super Demon. First appearing in Final Crisis Secret Files, Issue 1, released in February 2009, Etrigan, aka Super Demon, is an alternate universe version of Superman. Well, kinda. It's more accurate to say that he's an alternate version of the Demon, aka Etrigan. So he's really just an alternate version of Superman and the Demon. Anyways, back to his story. Instead of being from Krypton, Super Demon is from the planet Camelot, and was sent to Earth by Merlin. Yes, the wizard. There on Earth, he'd be found by Jason Blood. Then the two would bond and fight crime together. And that's it. That was it for a while. That Super Demon didn't really do too much. In fact, he did barely anything. 6 years later, another Super Demon would be introduced in the multiverse, in the Multiversity Guidebook, released in March 2015. And since then, he's appeared in quite a few stories. He's pretty much got the same backstory as the other Super Demon, but this time, he's part of the multiversal superhero team called the Supermen of the Multiverse. When it comes to his powers, he's got quite a few. He can shoot hellfire out of his eyes, spit out like a lava fire breath. He's got super strength, super speed, and since he's a demon from hell, he's got a bunch of magical abilities as well. Superman NES. Released in 1987 in Japan and 1988 in the United States, Superman for the NES is a very odd Superman game. The plot of the game is your standard Superman story. He fights Lex Luthor, General Zod, and some other baddies, then, saves the day. What's weird about this game, though, is that Clark is only able to become Superman if his superpower energy is high enough. Which, yes, means that you can play as both Superman and Clark. And yes, you can also change back to being Clark in the middle of a level if your power level gets too low. Also, according to the game's manual, Lex Luthor lined every single building in Metropolis with lead, meaning that Superman can't see through them. Also, the Statue of Liberty can talk in this universe. There's also these weird blob monster things that roam around and Superman has to fight. It's a really, really weird day in Metropolis. The final thing I want to mention is how in Japan, the game actually uses variations of the John Williams Superman score. Film serials. In 1948, a 15-part film serial was released in theaters based on Superman. Starring Kirk Alyn as the Man of Steel, Newell O'Neill as Lois Lane, and Timmy Bond as Jimmy Olsen, the serials tell the story of Superman's origin and Superman's first battle with a supervillain. And no, it's not Lex Luthor. It's an original villain called Spider Lady. She wouldn't appear in anything outside of this until 2021, where she finally showed back up in a comic. Anyways, this film serial was very popular at the time, and even got a sequel in 1950, titled Atom Man vs. Superman. All the original cast returned for the second 15-part film serial. This serial is about Superman battling Lex Luthor, who in this continuity goes by the name Atom Man, something that has never shown up in any other story. Despite Superman vs. the Mole Men being the first Superman film released, these two serials are the first time Superman has ever been adapted into live action. Both of these film serials are extremely historic, and a must-see for any fan of film history. Although they're both extremely long, with the first serial being 4 hours long, and the second one being 4 hours and 12 minutes, so they're a commitment if you watch them. Supergirl and Lex Luthor bang. In the 1990s, Supergirl went through some pretty interesting changes. For example, she was retconned into being a shape-shifting alien from a pocket dimension, which I'll talk about a bit more later. But her love life was also messed with a bit. You see, in the 90s, Supergirl entered a pretty serious relationship with Lex Luthor II, the son of Lex Luthor, who took over Lexcorp after his father died of cancer. Except, this wasn't actually Lex's son. You see, before Lex died of cancer, he cloned a younger body for himself and transferred his mind over to it before his old body succumbed to the cancer. So basically, Lex Luthor was pretending to be his son who doesn't actually exist. So unknowns to Supergirl, she was actually dating Lex and not his son. Regardless, this wasn't really something Superman was very fond of, as from his perspective, it was his cousin dating the son of his arch-nemesis, who's tried to kill him more times than anyone could ever count. Because of this, Superman's relationship with his not-really cousin was a bit rocky for a while, until he died for a bit, then came back. But anyways, was this a true relationship? Supergirl was very much in love with Lex Luthor, but was Lex really in love? No, of course he wasn't in love with her. He was actually just using her DNA to create an army of Supergirl clones. And when she found out about this, She was understandably a little bit annoyed, and so destroyed all of them, and nearly killed Lex. Blue Steel. Blue Steel was the development name for a Superman game being developed by Factor 5 from 2007 to 2008. The game was never announced to the public, so when it was cancelled in 2008 due to the Great Recession, nobody outside of members of Factor 5 really knew what potential this game had. Since its cancellation, numerous gameplay videos and pieces of concept art have been leaked, showing off Superman flying around Metropolis fighting foes with his heat vision. Also, there was an element of destruction to Metropolis. For example, some buildings you could actually fly through, and when you throw enemies at certain buildings, they'll damage them. But Metropolis wasn't the only place you could actually explore. Apocalypse, Smallville, the ruins of Krypton, and the Fortress of Solitude would have also been explorable. Though, while all of these locations would be explorable, none of them would be open world. Instead, the game would be split up into episodes that you'd play through. Each episode would contain a huge chunk of a certain location to explore, so it was like an open world light. When it comes to the story of Blue Steel, we don't really know anything at all, that we do know that Superman would have faced off against a ton of his rogues, like Darkseid, Brimstone, Lex Luthor, Livewire, Calabac, Non, and Doomsday. General Zod also would have been playable to some extent. It's a shame that the game was never completed, as from what we know, it had potential to be the first real great 3D Superman game. Superman Year 1. So people love Batman Year 1, and it seems that people really like Wonder Woman Year 1, and Robin Year 1 as well. So it only makes sense that Superman would eventually get this Year 1 treatment as well. Released from August 2019 to October of the same year, Superman Year 1 was written by Frank Miller. And just like that, you know that this comic is controversial. This story is Frank Miller's take on Superman's origin, which sadly means that yes, this does take place in Earth 31, which yeah, it's home to Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year 1, but it's also home to The Dark Knight Strikes Back, All-Star Batman and Robin, The Dark Knight The Master Race, and The Dark Knight The Golden Child. Anyways, this comic is filled with weird stuff. Most notably, Superman joins the US Navy SEALs and battles Islamic pirates with his Navy SEAL team. He later fights Batman because I guess in every story we have to have Superman and Batman fight. He also tries to date a mermaid named Lori, which admittedly is pretty based, except the writing in the relationship is really bad, so it's not actually based. Superman then has to battle and defeat Poseidon, her father, in order for him to date her. This is complicated by Poseidon saying how he wants to marry his own daughter. Superman is thankfully able to defeat him, and then becomes the king of Atlantis and declares that he will never leave Lori or Atlantis. But then the next issue arrives, and Lori and Atlantis are never mentioned again, so I guess he just, bailed on them. Then Lex Luthor shows up and starts being really creepy towards Wonder Woman, and yes, she shows up for some reason. Batman also uses a gun several times in the story with the intent to kill, which is very strange because this is the same Batman that said this. Sure, this panel takes place decades later, but, I mean, it's still kind of odd. Overall, Superman Year 1 is a very weird miniseries that wasn't very well received. Metropolis TV show. In January 2018, it was announced that a show titled Metropolis would be created for the streaming service DC Universe. It was being created by the producers behind Gotham. The show would follow Lois Lane and Lex Luthor working together as they investigate the dark underworld of Metropolis. And yes, this show would take place before Clark moved to Metropolis and became Superman. Outside of an update in May 2018 about the show being redeveloped and that the first season would have 13 episodes, there was never again an update about this show. And since DC Universe is no longer around, really don't know why they thought that was a good idea for a streaming service. No. Then again, it wasn't the weirdest streaming service ever. That was probably Stargate Command. It's clear that this show will probably never happen. Super Soldier. First appearing in Marvel vs. DC issue 3, released in April 1996, Super Soldier is the combination of Superman and Captain America. Because for those that don't know, around this time Marvel and DC were doing this big crossover where they combine a lot of the characters and put them into a new universe. Anyways, Clark Kent, yes, they didn't call him Clark Rogers or anything, they just kept Superman's real name, was given a super soldier formula combined with solar radiation, This turned him into the hero Super Soldier, which is honestly a very lazy name, but whatever. And so during the Second World War, he fought alongside the All-Star Winners Squadron and battling the evil forces of Hydra, who was being secretly led by Green Skull, a combination of Lex Luthor and Red Skull. His time fighting in World War II came to an end when he seemingly died fighting Ultra Metallo, which is a combination of Ultron and Metallo. Though 50 years later he'd be thawed out of ice and continue his superhero crusade in taking down Green Skull and Ultra Metallo, who are still around somehow. When it comes to his powers, he just kind of has like Superman's standard abilities, though now he has a vibranium shield and a rifle that he refuses to kill people with.
You're watching Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Yeah, that sounds great.
What are you watching?
Superman fighting Brainiac?
Did you turn it down?
Cool new Superman toys are now at Burger King. You can get one with every Kids Club meal.
Well, what have we here?
Whoa. Burger King Kids Club. Great food, cool stuff, kids only.
We now return to Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Jimmy Olsen creates Supergirl. In Superman issue 123, released in August of 1958, Supergirl makes her first appearance. Kinda. In this story, Jimmy Olsen discovers a Native American totem. It's magical, and if you rub a certain jewel on it, you'll be able to make a wish. So he does, but it's like a really weird wish. Instead of world peace or something, he's like, I want my buddy Superman to have a Supergirl girlfriend. This then creates Supergirl, who tries to help Superman in his day-to-day crime fighting. Superman seems to really like her, which makes Lois Lane extremely jealous. Her brief run at trying to fight crime eventually came to an end, when one day Superman is knocked out by kryptonite, so she races over to him to save him, without knowing that she's also hurt by kryptonite. So after saving Superman, she then begins to slowly die of kryptonite poisoning, and so Jimmy Olsen comes in and makes a new wish, that Supergirl didn't exist. So, like, instead of dying, she just gets, like, erased from existence. You could have just, like, wished for her to be immune to kryptonite, but no, I guess just not existing's better. Just 1 year later, in Action Comics issue 252, released in May 1959, the real Supergirl would make her debut. And this Jimmy Olsen created Supergirl would just fade into obscurity. Closter. First appearing in Superman, The Man of Steel, issue 17, released in November of 1992, Closter is a creature created by Dabney Donovan while working on Project Cadmus. Exiled from the lab that he was created in, Closter lived most of his life chilling out the sewers of Metropolis, where he eventually joined the organization the Underworlders, a group of freakish monster people created by Donovan. Together, they'd plot several different attacks on the surface world and battle Superman, Supergirl, Guardian, and even Doomsday, who, like, wiped out most of their forces. In regards to his powers, Closter is your standard brute. He's got extreme super strength and spikes made of bones sticking out of his body. He's also really dumb. There's not really a lot going on with him, outside of how weird it is that Superman had a villain that looked like Doomsday that lived in the sewers of Metropolis. Though despite there not really being much to him, he still showed up as a boss fight in the video game The Death and Return of Superman, released in 1994. Cancelled Superman Family Cartoon. In May 2018, Vinton Hyuk and Sean Galloway approached Warner Bros. Animation with a pitch for a Superman Family animated series. The show is described as adapting Superman stories with a lighter tone, inspired by the Silver Age of DC Comics. The show was also going to be aimed towards kids and feature characters like Natasha Irons, Damian Wayne, John Kent, Colin Kennan, Krypton the Superdog, etc. Sadly, the show would get rejected by Warner Bros. In favor of Harley Quinn, which is really weird because those two shows don't even remotely have the same target demo, but oh well. Lucy and Superman. Lucy and Superman is the 166th episode of the sitcom I Love Lucy. Airing on January 14th, 1957, this episode featured George Reeves reprising his role as Superman. The plot of this episode had Superman visiting New York City, which makes a kid named Ricky really excited, as he really wants Superman to show up at his birthday party. However, Superman is only visiting a Macy's store, so he can't actually visit the party. In order to cheer Ricky up, Lucy creates her own Superman costume. But, surprise surprise, Superman is actually able to meet Ricky as he shows up at his house. Through some wacky shenanigans, Lucy gets stuck outside and needs saving, so Superman goes to rescue her. While being credited as playing Superman in the episode, George Reeves isn't actually playing Superman, but is instead playing an actor playing Superman. So it's not like I Love Lucy is canon to the DC multiverse or something. Kara Zor-El in Superman the Animated Series. So everyone knows that Supergirl showed up for a couple episodes in Superman the Animated Series, Justice League Unlimited, and even an episode of Batman the Animated Series. But what you might not know is that while Supergirl in the DCAU is partially adapted from the main comic Supergirl, Kara Zor-El, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini weren't actually allowed to use that name in the show, or even her original origin, as at the time, DC Comics really wanted Superman to be the only surviving Kryptonian in all forms of media. So they had to compromise. They had to change her name to Kara Inze, and change her origin to being from a Kryptonian colony world instead of just Krypton. Also, she's not related to Superman at all. So the DCAU Supergirl is in this really weird mess where she's both an adaptation of Kara Zor-El, but also an original character. Smallville Season 11. So Smallville had 10 seasons with 217 episodes. But if you really needed more Smallville in your life, there's that universe's appearance in the Arrowverse. But if you needed even more Smallville, there's the books. But if you need even more Smallville, there was a comic series titled Smallville Season 11 that continues the story of the show. Written by Brian Q. Miller, this comic started out in April 2012 and ended in May of 2015, with 35 issues. It introduced several different characters into the Smallville continuity, like Batman, Wonder Woman, the Green Lantern Corps, Hades, Black Flash, Parallax, Miss Martian, Raven, Jon Stewart, etc. But if you needed even more Smallville, an actual Season 11 might be happening. In June 2021, it was revealed that an animated revival of Smallville was being developed and pitched to Warner Bros. Later in January 2022, the pitch was handed in to Warner Bros., and in May of that year, it was reported that the Smallville revival was in pre-production. It's always possible that this could get cancelled, but right now it seems likely that fans of Smallville might be getting another season. Superman's Metropolis. Released in 1996 and written by Jean-Marc Lassifere, Randy Lassifere, and Roy Thomas, Superman's Metropolis is an Elseworld story and a kinda crossover between Superman and the 1927 film Metropolis. The story sees Clark Kent arriving from space as a baby, and then being taken in by the Kent family. Because of this, Clark now comes from a very wealthy family, as his father, John Kent, is the master of Metropolis. Unfortunately for the Kent family, the evil scientist named Luthor is actually in love with John's wife, and out of jealousy, he kills her and then turns John into a puppet using hypnosis, allowing him to secretly rule over Metropolis. As he gets older, Clark learns about the social inequality of Metropolis once he meets a teacher named Lois Lane. He joins the standard workforce and then tries to convince his daddy to fix the city. But John refuses, because Luthor still has him under his control. Luthor then captures Lois Lane, and then creates a robot modeled off her named Futara, in order to prevent a potential revolution from happening. It's then revealed that Clark actually has superpowers. It turns out when Luthor killed Clark's mother, he discovered that Clark had powers, and so he erased his memories so that he would forget that he had powers. Clark then becomes Superman, destroys Futara, and kills Luthor, who's revealed to be a cyborg being fueled by kryptonite. Also, John Kent dies. Rest in peace. The day is saved, and Clark and Lois become the new rulers of Metropolis, and begin the process of fixing the city. Luthor would go on to appear in 2 more stories set in the Metropolis continuity, titled Batman Nosferatu and Wonder Woman the Blue Amazon. In these stories, it's revealed that before he died, Luthor had experimented on people. Take the Laughing Man, for example, who's this universe's Joker. He's a terrifying cyborg that was sent to live in Arkham. Seriously, this might be like the scariest look Joker's ever had. Cancelled The Adventures of Super Pup show. In 1958, it was decided to create a Superman show where all the characters would be furries. No, I'm not joking. The show would be called The Adventures of Super Pup, and only the first episode would ever be filmed. In this universe, Clark Kent is actually Bark Bent, who works with Pamela Poodle at the Daily Bugle. And in the pilot episode, Bark Bent must save Pamela Poodle from Professor Sheepdip. The people who owned the Superman rights at the time must have not been very impressed with the show, as it would never be picked up for more than just one episode. Thankfully, this strange cancelled show's pilot episode is still viewable, but only in the Superman Ultimate Collector's Edition DVD set. Amish Superman. Written by Alan Davis, Justice League The Nail is a 3-issue miniseries that ran from August to October of 1998, and was about Martha and Pa Kent not being able to discover Kal-El because a nail in the road gave them a flat tire. And so, the world had no Superman. Until it does, he becomes Superman by the end of it. You see, because the Kents weren't able to actually get to him, Kal-El was then discovered by an Amish community, and so he was raised in an environment that ignored the outside world and practiced pacifism. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor had actually found Kal-El's baby spaceship and used traces of Kal's DNA to turn Jimmy Olsen into a kind of bootleg Kryptonian. This caused poor Jimmy to go insane, as he wanted to replace humanity with Kryptonians. Because of this, the Justice League fought him for a bit, which eventually led them to fighting in the Amish community that Kal-El lived in. There, Jimmy murdered Kal's parents, which inspired Kal-El to become Superman, and so he joined the Justice League and saved the day by defeating Jimmy Olsen. This story continued in the 3-part miniseries Another Nail, which has the League getting involved in a war between Apocalypse and the New Gods. Lois Lane does blackface. Oh boy. In Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane issue 106, released in November of 1970, Lois Lane decides to be a black woman for a day in order to understand how black people live in Metropolis. This only happens after pretty much everyone in Metropolis's community, called Little Africa, ignores her when she shows up to do interviews for the Daily Planet. After being ignored, somebody shouts out that nobody should trust her because she's white, and in the 1970s, if an African-American person were to talk to a white person, they were risking their lives. Later on, Lois tells Superman that they're right about a lot of white people, but not her, as she's not racist. And so she's like, "Hey Superman, can you use this race-changing machine so I can learn how black people live?" And so, she becomes black for 24 hours. And now she understands that racism exists, and that more needs to be done to solve it. It's a story that I think was made with noble intentions to actually address racism and stuff, but man, did they really miss the mark with it. It is a very painful read. Also, when Lois Lane asks Superman if he'd still love her if she was black, he refuses to answer her, so that's really weird. Overall, I don't think DC is going to be referencing this story anytime soon. Superman Ant. In Action Comics issue 296, released in January 1963, Superman faced off against one of his most powerful foes, giant nuclear alien ants. They arrived on Earth after the humans on their world destroyed their planet with nuclear weapons. It's never actually explained why there's humans on this planet, just roll with it. This caused the ants there to grow in size and intelligence. Upon figuring out what the humans did to themselves, they decided to dedicate their entire ant society lives to traveling around the universe and convincing all sentient beings to abolish war. When they arrived on Earth, Superman instantly thought they were the bad guys and began attacking them. And so they decided to kidnap Lois Lane to make her their queen in order to lure Superman into their colony. In order to negotiate with the alien ants, Superman uses red kryptonite to turn himself into a Kryptonian ant hybrid. This actually solves all their problems, as Superman now understands the ants and is able to communicate with them and understand their goal. After explaining the situation to Lois Lane, the two of them help the ants fix their spaceship so that they can continue their peaceful journey across the stars. Surprisingly, that's not the end of Ant Superman. An alternate universe Superman, known only as Rant, first appeared in Sideways issue 8, released in November 2018, was originally just your standard Superman, before being corrupted by red kryptonite, turning him into this weird Kryptonian ants hybrid. Superman Reborn. As mentioned way earlier in the video, Superman Lives was born from another cancelled Superman film titled Superman Reborn. This script was written by Jonathan Limpkin and is really weird. Really, really weird. So in this cancelled film, Doomsday would show up after being created by some invading aliens and would kill Superman. But before Superman died, his life force jumped between him and Lois Lane, which resulted in impregnating Lois Lane with himself. Then some alien named Morpheus takes control over Metropolis, saying that there will no longer be police or punishment for crimes. After being pregnant for only a single week, Lois Lane then gives birth, and is then murdered by criminals attempting to claim a bounty on her head by Morpheus. Also, Jimmy Olsen dies in the chaos here. RIP. Lois's kid would then be saved by a nurse, and end up in the sewers where he meets Dr. Harry Cadmus. Within 3 weeks, the child has grown to the age of 21, and is taught by the doctor about his father's history, and how to use his powers. He then becomes Superman, defeats Morpheus, and saves the day. Warner Bros. Rejected the script. But not for the reasons you probably think. They rejected it because of its similar themes to Batman Forever. The film would then be rewritten by Gregory Poirier in 1995, and get rid of all the virgin birth stuff. This new version of the script had Superman being killed by Doomsday, who was created by Brainiac, and then being resurrected by an alien named Cadmus, who gives him a robotic suit to defeat Brainiac. Though by the end of the film, he'd end up wearing the black suit that he wore during the Death of Superman story arc. Parasite and Silver Banshee would also appear in the film to some extent. Warner Bros. Really liked this script, but they just wanted to edit it a bit, so they hired Kevin Smith, who completely rewrote the film again into Superman Lives, due to him believing that neither Reborn scripts respected the Superman mythos. Whom Gods Destroy. Written by Chris Claremont, Superman and Wonder Woman, Whom Gods Destroy is a 4-part Elseworld story released from October 1996 to January of 1997. In this universe, the Axis powers won World War II, and so, all of Europe is under Germany's control. Well, not actually Germany, as it turns out the god Adonis is ruling over Germany, so really, they're the one in charge. Superman and Lois then travel to Germany in search of Lana Lang, who's been captured by the Axis powers. There, they discover that Wonder Woman has betrayed Paradise Island and is now a proud member of the Third Reich. Because pretty much all of Europe is now being ruled by a Greek god, several monsters from Greek mythology are given to the Axis powers to help them conquer the world. Along with the monsters, the Greek goddess Circe works with them and transforms Superman into an evil centaur, while Athena transforms Lois Lane into the new Wonder Woman. Superman then gets turned into a woman briefly, infiltrates the Axis powers, and eventually Lois Lane defeats the evil Wonder Woman. With the day saved and Adonis being sent off to hell, Superman, Lois Lane, and Lana Lang move in together in the Fortress of Solitude, which is on the moon for some reason, and enter a polyamorous relationship. Also, it's revealed that this entire story was just Zeus and Hera playing a game of chess using the world as their pieces. It is a very weird comic with even weirder art. Superman vs. Muhammad Ali. Released in 1978 and written by Dennis O'Neil, Superman vs. Muhammad Ali tells the story of Superman teaming up with Muhammad Ali to stop an alien invasion by competing in a boxing match. Though in the match, Superman wouldn't be allowed to use his powers for obvious reasons. In order for Superman to stand a chance in the boxing match without his powers, Muhammad Ali trained Superman for 2 months straight in the Fortress of Solitude, using a time warping machine, so that for them, it's 2 months, but for the rest of the world, it's only been 24 hours. Jimmy Olsen is then tasked with being the fight's broadcaster, and the match is on, being broadcasted across thousands of planets in the universe. Superman then loses, pretty badly, and Muhammad Ali is declared Earth's champion. And so, Muhammad Ali is then forced to box the aliens' boxing champion, and wins after 4 rounds. But then the aliens are just like, okay, that's pretty cool that you beat our champion, but Superman's beaten, so we can just destroy the Earth right now, regardless of you winning. But then, the aliens' boxing champion snaps and takes over the alien empire, as he says that they should respect the agreement. So weirdly in this story, Superman and Muhammad Ali aren't the ones that save the Earth. It's just this random dude named Hunya. Anyways, Muhammad Ali then tells Superman that he knows that he's Clark Kent, and that they're both the greatest. This comic went on to become one of Superman's most popular stories ever. The last thing I'll mention is that on the cover of the comic, the people who are watching the fight aren't just some randoms and a handful of DC heroes. No. The crowd consists of a ton of celebrities from the 1970s, along with Warner Bros. And DC employees. Even US Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter show up to watch. Superman Grounded. Superman Grounded is a storyline that ran from Superman issue 701, released in June 2010, to Superman issue 714, released in August 2011. The story is very simple. Superman begins to believe that he no longer understands or connects with the everyday American, and so he decides to literally walk across the entire mainland USA to reconnect with people. Before its release, DC held a contest that asked readers to write in explaining why their towns and residents should be shown in the series. So most of the cities that Superman travels to in the story were chosen due to the people from those cities convincing DC through the contest. On his journey, he stops a woman from taking her own life in Philadelphia, restarting a factory in Detroit, rebuilding Danville, Ohio after accidentally destroying it, fighting some dude who got temporary superpowers, stopping an abusive father in Chicago, saves some workers from a fire in an unsafe chemical plant in Des Moines, saves some kids in a school bus in Nebraska, eats at a restaurant with the Flash in Boulder, Colorado, saves an archaeologist in Ogden, Utah, saves Livewire and helps her reform in Las Vegas, quits being Superman for like 10 minutes in Newsburg, Oregon, and finally saves Lois Lane in Seattle. Kinda weird how nobody talks about how, in the continuity before New 52, Livewire was actually a hero at the very end of it. Flame Dragon from Krypton. First appearing in Superman issue 78, released in September 1952, the Kryptonian Flame Dragon isn't actually a single entity, but a species of dragons that are from Krypton. They're primarily green in color with purple scales. It's got all your, standard dragon powers, like flight, flame breath, etc. They appeared a handful of times, arriving on Earth in various different ways to bother Superman and the people of Metropolis, but only in stories from the 1950s and 60s. In modern-day DC Comics, outside of maybe a background cameo or something, these dragons don't really do anything anymore. Though I do like to think that they're what inspired the dragon-like creatures featured in Man of Steel. The Last Sun. First appearing in Dark Knight's Death Metal, The Multiverse Who Laughs, released in January 2021, this is an alternate universe version of Superman who, like everyone introduced in the Dark Knight's Death Metal series, is pretty evil. This Superman story begins just like many others, born on Krypton and then launched off the planet before it was destroyed. However, unlike other Supermen, baby Kal-El's rocket malfunctioned, and instead of heading straight to Earth, Kal was flown through a million different suns. This did some pretty bad things to him, so now Kal-El, now going by Kill All, now just wants to kill pretty much everything. So the Batman Who Laughs unleashed him to battle the Justice League, and surprisingly the League failed. He's able to defeat all of them and is nearly able to kill Superman. He's only stopped by Lex Luthor, who creates a supermassive black hole that sucks him in and kills him. President Superman. First appearing in Final Crisis issue 7, released in March 2009, Kal-El was launched off his homeworld of Krypton and landed on Earth, where he was raised by the Ellis family. And the rest is pretty much your standard Superman story, minus the Kents, Lois Lane, and the Daily Planet. Kal-El took up the name Calvin Ellis and became his universe's Superman, battling Lex Luthor, Brainiac, and would even form the Justice League. But what's probably the most well-known aspect of him is that in his universe, he became the President of the United States. As President, he's balanced the national budget, formed the Alliance of Nations, had an insanely high approval rating, and even solved the Libya crisis. As confirmed by Grant Morrison, this version of Superman is inspired by both Barack Obama and Muhammad Ali. Superman vs. Nicotine. In December of 1980, the Health Education Council teamed up with DC Comics to create a campaign in the UK titled Superman vs. Nicotine. This campaign would consist of commercials, comics, and magazine ads. The campaign was all about telling kids about how smoking is bad for you and that you shouldn't do it. So in all these forms of media, Superman battles the villainous Nicotine, who's trying to get kids to smoke. On some of the comic and magazine ads, children could sign a pledge to never smoke and mail it in to get a poster and some badges featuring Superman. As for the commercials, which were done by Richard Williams Animation Studio, these showcase Superman defeating Nicotine in various ways, one of which involves him straight up murdering him. Original casting. Like with all films and shows, the characters featured in all Superman films and TV shows went through various different casting decisions until a final actor was chosen for the role. Here's some of the actors that almost made the cut. For the original Christopher Reeve Superman films, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Muhammad Ali, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, and Clint Eastwood were all considered for Superman. Annie Archer, Leslie Ann Warren, and Carrie Fisher were all considered for Lois Lane. Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson, and Gene Wilder were considered for Lex Luthor, and Christopher Lee was considered for General Zod. For the DCEU, Joe Manganiello, Matthew Goode, and Matt Bomer were considered for Superman. Rachel McAdams, Malin Akerman, Amanda Seyfried, Zoe Saldana, and Mary Elizabeth Winston were all considered for Lois Lane. Adam Driver, Matt Damon, Tom Hanks, Bradley Cooper, and Joaquin Phoenix were all considered for Lex Luthor. And Viggo Mortensen was considered for General Zod. As for the Arrowverse, Claire Holt, Gemma Atkinson, Elizabeth Lail, and Kayla Compton were all considered for Supergirl. Superman, Secret Identity. So remember Superboy Prime and how he comes from a world where only he has powers and the rest of the DC heroes and villains are just comic characters? Yeah, so what if he didn't become evil? Or I guess more accurately, what if Crisis on Infinite Earths didn't happen? Well, a concept like that was explored in Superman's Secret Identity. This was a 4-part miniseries released from January to April 2004 and was written by Kurt Busiek. In this universe, Clark Kent is born on Earth instead of Krypton, and is named as such because his parents, David and Laura Kent, are big fans of the comic book hero Superman. And you know how weirdos will name their kids some dumb, nerdy reference? And the internet always responds to stories like this going like, boy, that kid's gonna get bullied one day. Well, that exact thing happens to Clark, as people at school love to harass him for his name. That is, until one night he wakes up and he's got Superman's powers. It's not really explained in the story, he just kinda has them now. But anyways, this changes his life, and he becomes a superhero in secret. Flash forward a few years, and he marries a woman named Lois Shud Hardy, and is later kidnapped by the US government, who want to perform experiments on him. He escapes, and eventually his wife is pregnant, and they're expecting twins. But then the US government comes back and it's like, hey, you're gonna work for us, or we'll mess with your family. And so years go by as Clark takes missions for the US government. That is, until he hits his late 50s. As for some reason, his powers begin to disappear. But luckily for him, his daughters were born with powers, so they help him save people. Knowing that they'll be able to carry on his legacy and save people, Clark retires, but will still occasionally fly around with his daughters and grandson, just, for fun. Superman's Zoo. In Action Comics issue 241, released in June 1958, we're introduced to Superman's Zoo. Yeah, it turns out that Superman has a zoo in the Fortress of Solitude. Or, as it was known in 1958, Fort Superman. Most of the animals in the zoo are either the last of their kind, or one of the last of their kind, but they're all from different alien worlds. While yes, they have escaped a handful of times, for the most part, it seems that these animals are relatively happy living in the Fortress of Solitude. Also, Superman has a second zoo in the Fortress of Solitude that's dedicated exclusively to bizarro animals. Superman 1 Million.
The Golden God!
AKA Superman Prime, this version of the character first appeared in DC 1 Million issue 4, released in November of 1998. This Superman is from an alternate universe where he basically became God. Like, he's not like the god of that universe, but he's pretty close to one in terms of power. In this universe, Superman left the Earth towards the end of the 21st century, once everyone he cared about passed away, and thus he traveled the universe and eventually created a new Fortress of Solitude, in the center of a super sun. This would greatly enhance his powers, and he'd return to Earth in the 700th century, where he'd eventually have Lois Lane resurrected, allowing him to finally be happy again. As for his powers, like I said, they're pretty much godlike. Basically, take your standard Superman powers and amplify them times 1,000,000. He's also got the ability to travel through the multiverse in time and space. It's also been stated that he's been to heaven and hell, so I guess he can just, like, kind of go anywhere. I should also mention here that there are theories out there that this Superman is the same Superman from the critically acclaimed series All-Star Superman, as that series ends with Superman living in a sun for a while. Grant Morrison, the creator of both these versions of Superman, has stated that they did intend for these two to be the same character, but they aren't actually the same, they're from different universes. Beppo the Super Monkey. First appearing in Superboy issue 76, released in October 1959, Beppo is a Kryptonian monkey that was used by Jor-El to test spaceflight. Pretty messed up of him to do that, but people on Earth do that as well, so I guess we're no better. Anyways, when Krypton was doing its whole blowing up thing, Beppo hid away on Kal's baby rocket, and so was spared from death. Beppo would just kind of go away for a while until Kal was a kid. He'd return and cause some trouble, so Kal-El was just like, okay, I guess I'll just, like, leave you stranded in deep space as punishment. And so he just kind of, like, stayed there for a little bit. He'd eventually find his way back to Earth and join the Legion of Super Pets, and hasn't really done much since. He has yet to be reintroduced in the main DC continuity, though he has shown up in a handful of alternate universes, like The Last 52, Tiny Titans, DC Super Friends, Batman 66, and the Krypto the Superdog cartoon. Comics. Also, Kingdom Come for some reason. Stamp Day for Superman. Released in 1954, Stamp Day for Superman is an 18-minute long short film starring George Reeves as Superman, and has the rest of the Adventures of Superman cast reprising their roles. This short film was created due to the United States Department of the Treasury wanting to advertise saving bonds to children. And so the film tells the story of Superman stopping a robbery, and the robber's just kind of like, I gotta steal money, because I've never saved any money. And Superman's just like, damn, I guess that sucks, but like, you're going to jail still. Later, Jimmy Olsen and Clark attend a Stamp Day event and learn about the pros of buying stamps and saving bonds. Superman then saves Lois Lane from a jewel thief holding her hostage, and my god, does he have the most nothing reaction to Superman showing up.
No, I don't believe it.
Then Superman advertises buying saving bonds to children, and the story just comes to an end. This short was never shown in theaters, and was created exclusively to be shown around in schools to educate kids about saving bonds and stamps. Also, this is the only Superman film ever to be in the public domain, due to it being distributed by the US government, so the whole thing is available on YouTube for free. Superman Aliens. Superman Aliens, also known as Superman vs. Aliens, is a 3-issue crossover series written by Dan Jurgens, and released from July to September of 1995. The story sees Superman and various other Superman-related characters interacting with and battling the Xenomorphs from the Alien and Predator franchise. In this universe, Supergirl is introduced saving Superman's life after he travels to the remains of Krypton upon receiving a distress signal. It turns out that this Kryptonian city is filled with Xenomorphs, who arrived via a crashing freighter containing an alien queen. Should also mention here that Superman is powered down throughout the story, as he's incredibly far away from any sun or star. Anyways, Superman and Supergirl eventually get impregnated by the Xenomorphs, but are luckily able to remove the chest bursters, though during their escape Supergirl is thought to be killed, though she would show up again in the sequel titled Superman Aliens 2: God War. Written by Chuck Dixon and released from May to December 2002, this 4-issue miniseries sees Darkseid using a bunch of xenomorph eggs on New Genesis in an attempt to wipe out the New Gods. Superman just so happens to be visiting New Genesis at this time, and is able to warn them about the xenomorph threat. And so the New Gods and Xenomorphs battle it out for a while, and the comic ends with Darkseid creating a parademon xenomorph army that is never followed up on because a third installment never happened. Also, I lied about Supergirl. It's revealed that she does survive at the end of the first series, but she's not in the sequel at all, so I don't really know what happens with her. I guess they just, didn't care to bring her back. There was also another Superman and Alien crossover in Superman and Batman vs. Alien and Predator, and I talk about that crossover in the first Batman Iceberg. But no, it's not a sequel to these two stories, it's its own continuity. There'd also be a 3-issue crossover released from May to July 2000 called Superman vs. Predator, but it's also not in continuity with any of the Superman vs. Alien stories. This story sees a Predator tracking down Star Labs who are trying to use some alien tech to end the world. Superman is also trying to take down Star Labs, and so the two butt heads will try to stop Star Labs. Oh, and also there's JLA vs. Predator, which is about the Justice League battling a team of Predators who were genetically engineered to have superpowers. It was written by John Ostrander and released in February 2001. The Coming of the Supermen. Written by Neil Adams and Tony Bedard, The Coming of the Supermen is a 6-issue series released from April to September 2016. The story has 3 Kryptonians land on Earth and meet with Superman. These Kryptonians are Majar, Ted M, and Vorem. They came to Earth to recruit Superman into a war they're fighting against Darkseid on New Krypton. The 4 of them then team up to defeat Darkseid, the Forces of Apocalypse, and Lex Luthor, who is working with Darkseid. Well, I mean, he was working with him until he realized that Darkseid was probably just going to invade Earth after he took over New Krypton. Oh, and the writing is really weird in this story. Ever wanted to see Superman say, "What's up?" Also, Superman and Lex Luthor make fun of Darkseid, which is weird, but pretty funny, actually. There's a lot of weird stuff in this story. Probably the strangest bit of it all is when it's revealed that Darkseid's dad was a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, and that the Sphinx was designed after him. Overman. First appearing in 52 issue 52, released in July 2007, Carl Kent has your standard Superman origin story, except for one little detail. Instead of landing in Kansas, he landed in Sudetenland in 1938, which was occupied at the time by the Axis powers. You see where this is going now, don't you? Being taken in by the German government, Kal-El was given the name Carl Kent, and the superhero name of Overman. The rocket he flew to Earth in was then taken in by Germany, and they reverse-engineered the tech to win World War II. So Overman grew up as a member of the Axis powers, and even became a member of Justice League Axis. There was also Overgirl in this universe, who was a clone of him that he considered his cousin. And if you thought that this was the only Axis power Superman out there, you would be weirdly very wrong. Years later, in the Multiversity Guidebook, released in March 2015, the world would be reintroduced to Overman, but this time, in his universe, he was raised by Hitler directly, which is very interesting. Overman in this universe would help Germany take over the world, and then leave for 3 years. And when he returned, he was like, wait, hang on a second, guys, I think genocide might be a bad thing. But he still continued to work with the Axis powers, so I guess he didn't really care too much about that. I mean, he would eventually feed information to Resistance members, which resulted in the Axis powers being destroyed, but he only did that after, 10 years after returning to Earth, so again, I guess it wasn't really that big of an issue for him. There's also a lot of other Axis power Superman out there, like her Superman from Earth 8, there's Earth 10 Superman, another Overman from the DCAU, and a dude called Ubermensch, who is also called the Overman, but wasn't actually an alternate Superman, but I'm going to count him here because he's called Overman and he's part of the Axis powers. There's also an Overgirl and Supergirl and the Ray. There's even a Cyborg Overman. I think that's enough Axis power Superman out there, though. I don't think we need any more. Superman of the Multiverse. First appearing in Final Crisis issue 7, released in March 2009, the Superman of the Multiverse is a superhero team that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of Supermen from various different universes that teamed up to battle Mandrake and Ultraman. There's been a ton of different members of the team, like Earth 11 Superwoman, the DCAU Superman, Earth 14 Superman, The Just Superman, Kong Kenan, Kingdom Come Superman, Sunshine Superman, Red Sun Superman, Super Chief, Captain Carrot, All-Star Superman's son, and Earth 5 Shazam, just to name a few. But that's not the only multiversal Superman group. There's also the Council of Supermen, who first appeared in Crisis on Infinite Earths Giant, released in February 2020. That features members like the Justice Lord Superman, who is evil, so I don't really know why he's working with them, the Adventures of Superman, Beppo the Super Monkey, Arrowverse Superman, and the Superman Returns Superman. Superman 5, aka Superman the New Movie. Reminds me of when Ghost in the Shell did that decades later. But anyways, written by Cary Bates, this film would see Superman battling Brainiac. After being defeated by Brainiac, Superman would be knocked out, allowing Brainiac to shrink Metropolis down and capture it. Superman is then teleported away by an unknown force, while Brainiac takes Lois Lane as a trophy of sorts. Superman wakes up in a Kryptonian hospital in Kandor, a shrunken Kryptonian city. It turns out that he was rescued by one of Jor-El's friends. Lois Lane is then able to trick Brainiac into freeing Superman, only because Brainiac had no idea that Superman was even still alive. And so the two battle it out again. This time, Superman is able to defeat Brainiac, and the fallen villain demands Superman to finish him, but Superman refuses. So Brainiac then takes a shard of metal and self-bans himself from his Minecraft server. But he's not dead yet. Turns out that Brainiac is actually a robot, and he attacks Superman once again. Brainiac then uses his growing technology to increase his size, while Superman uses it to shrink in size, allowing him to fly straight into Brainiac's brain and stab it with a metal shard. He then uses the growing tech to grow the shard, and Brainiac is then literally ripped in half from his brain. Superman then grows all the shrunken cities back to normal and reveals his identity to Lois Lane. The two agree to get married, and the film ends. So why didn't this film happen? Well, most people believe it's because of how bad Superman 4 was, but that's actually not it. It turns out that Warner Bros. Didn't want this film to happen, due to the show Lois and Clark existing, as it was doing extremely well at the time, and they didn't want to confuse audiences with two live-action Supermen. Also, the film Christopher Columbus The Discovery and its behind-the-scenes troubles killed the film, as the Sulkins, the owners of the Superman film rights at the time, had an insane fallout during the production of that film, and so the rights went to Warner Bros., and since they didn't want this film to happen, it didn't happen. Lost Original Comic. Superman's creation is interesting, because technically he's had 3 different first appearances. The original was a short story titled The Reign of the Superman, released in June 1933, where he appears as a villain, though he doesn't really have anything in common with Superman, outside of having powers and being called Superman. As in the story, he's the result of a mad scientist testing chemicals on a dude, instead of being an alien crime fighter. His third appearance is the one we all know, Action Comics issue 1, released in April 1938. However, his second appearance is sadly lost to time, and there's really no hope of it ever being recovered. Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, created a pitch issue for a comic titled The Superman. The two looked around for a publishing company, and would eventually find one, only for them to drop the pair shortly afterwards. And so the two looked around for more publishers, but nobody was biting. And so, enraged by this, Jerry Siegel threw the only copy of the issue into a fire. And so, all that remains is the cover of the comic and a rough sketch of it. We don't really know what story was told in this issue, except the fact that this version of Superman would be very different. Instead of being from an alien world, apparently he was just like a normal dude. The Eradicator. First appearing in Action Comics Annual Issue 2, released in June 1989, the Eradicator is a very weird character. He's been a hero, a villain, and an anti-hero. Created as a Kryptonian cultural genocide superweapon, No, really, it was created to preserve Kryptonian culture by eradicating other cultures, thus the name Eradicator. The Eradicator would be used to protect Kryptonians for centuries, until it was taken away from Krypton, where it would eventually encounter Superman on Warworld. Due to Superman being the sole survivor of Krypton, the Eradicator changed its mission to protect him. It originally did this by trying to turn Superman into a Kryptonian warrior. Superman was like, no thank you, and threw it into the sun. Eradicator would return a few years later, and take up a humanoid body once Superman was killed in battle at Doomsday. There he'd take up the Superman mantle and would stop crime, though he had no issue with killing, at all. When Superman returned to life, Eradicator would sacrifice his life to give Superman more strength. He'd eventually return, because, everyone in comics does. And when he returned, he tried to kill Krypto the Superdog, became Krypton Man for a bit, and even battled, and was killed by, and then possessed, Doomsday. Though this was actually a different Eradicator that had the original's memories, and also it was a clone of Doomsday, and not Doomsday himself. Whatever, it's still pretty significant. In the post-New 52 universe, Eradicator would be reintroduced in Superman issue 2, released in July 2016, where it was created by General Zod to hunt down Kryptonian criminals, and tries to murder Superman's son, John. Power-wise, Eradicator has your standard Superman abilities, like superhuman speed, flight, strength, etc. However, he can also manipulate energy, and can sense beings from other realities. It's also got telepathy, which is pretty useful. Also, I know I've been calling Eradicator a he and an it during this entry. I don't know, man. It's a robot, but the DC Wiki lists Eradicator's gender as male, so I'm just gonna call it both. As for Eradicator's appearances in media, surprisingly, he hasn't really been in a lot of things. He appears in the Death of Superman and Rebirth of Superman animated films, LEGO DC Supervillains, the Death and Return of Superman video game, and in Superman and Lois. Superman's red and blue clones. In Superman issue 162, released in July 1963, Superman creates a machine powered by kryptonite to increase his intelligence in order for him to figure out a way to eliminate all crime. So he uses the machine on himself, but instead of making him smarter, it splits him into two beings. These two clones are named Superman Blue and Superman Red. Together, the two Supermen fix Brainiac's enlarging ray to restore the shrunken Kryptonian city of Kandor, and then create an anti-evil ray that literally wipes out the concept of evil from Earth. Now that he literally can't be evil anymore, Lex Luthor decides to spend the rest of his life curing all known diseases. Superman Red would then marry Lois Lane, while Superman Blue married Lana Lang. The two clones would then create an army of Superman robots to prevent natural disasters from happening, so that they can just retire in peace. Now, this was an imaginary story, basically an Elseworld story before Elseworlds were a thing. Though while called an imaginary story, it actually takes place in a separate continuity, as in the Kingdom Come universe, you can just barely see this universe in hypertime, meaning that this story had to happen in some continuity. But that's not the end of the red and blue clones. You see, decades later, in the one-shot Superman Red, Superman Blue, released in February of 1998, Superman was split into two beings in the main DC continuity by Cyborg Superman and Toyman. These being red and blue clones, known again as Superman Red and Superman Blue. Instead of the imaginary story where they were pretty much just the same person, this time the clones had different personalities. Blue was more intelligent, while Red was way more aggressive. They also didn't really care for each other because they were both madly in love with Lois Lane. Overwhelmed by this, because, who wouldn't? Lois snaps at the two and refused to be with either of them, causing the clones to realize that maybe they should go back to being just one guy. But not with a machine or anything. Instead, they returned to one person when Superman's electromagnetic energy was dispersed.
You're watching Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
To stop the evil Doomsday, you need a hero who's more than a man. He's been called the greatest, the strongest, the first among heroes. high-voltage villain Conduit is powered by kryptonite. But with Krypton cannon-blasting laser Superman powers him down. Conduit will learn,
Don't mess with the S.
it's the dreaded Doomsday, the most fearsome force in the universe. Even Doomsday will learn, you don't mess with the S. Superman figures each sold separately, blocks not included.
We now return to Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Superman, Last Son of Earth. Released from July to August 2000 and written by Steve Gerber, Superman Last Son of Earth is an Elseworld story about what if the Superman origin story was reversed. What if a child was launched from Earth before its destruction to Krypton? A very different Krypton, as everyone wears biosuits that allows them to live for centuries. In this story, Jor-El and his not-wife, Lara, discover baby Clark Kent. And Lara's like, let's leave this baby to die. And Jor-El's like, what? No. He then adopts Clark and starts to teach the kid how to live on Krypton. Krypton also practices arranged marriages, as Jor-El is then arranged to marry Lara, and she hates this. Years go by, and Clark discovers a Green Lantern ring and becomes Krypton's Green Lantern. Though eventually, Clark would return to Earth, as it turns out it wasn't actually destroyed. You see, a meteorite had hit Earth in 1968. But I guess it didn't wipe out humanity, as when Clark arrives on Earth, he discovers that humanity still exists, along with Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and yes, Lex Luthor, who steals Clark's Green Lantern ring in an attempt at becoming all-powerful. 3 years later, in March 2003, a sequel one-shot titled Superman Last Stand on Krypton was released, also written by Steve Gerber. It tells the story of Superman battling Lex Luthor and General Zod during Krypton's final days, as the story ends with Krypton exploding, with Lara and Lois Lane being transported off the dying world, as Superman stays behind and dies. Atari Superman 3 video game. One of the earliest cancelled superhero video games has to be Atari's Superman 3. Based on the film of the same name, this game was made in 1983 for the Atari 5200. The game was very simple. You take control of Superman and try to stop a supercomputer from firing beams of energy towards different parts of Metropolis. You do this by flying around and firing your heat vision at beams of energy. The game was never completed, though a prototype does exist, as the game was fairly far into production. There's two reasons why this game was cancelled. These being the 1983 video game crash and the poor reception of Superman 3. Superman becomes a furry. In Action Comics issue 243, released in August of 1958, Superman saves a woman who turns out to be a descendant of Circe, a Greek goddess. And she's really into him, inviting him over for drinks and even asking him to marry her. Superman declines the offer, and then it's revealed that she poisoned his drink with a potion that will turn him into a lion man. And so, during work the next day, Clark turns into a lion man, and is forced to go by the name Super Lion for a bit. Eventually, he's able to figure out a cure to the potion, after discovering that one of the ingredients for the potion was kryptonite. But that wouldn't be the last time Superman would be turned into a lion man. In Superman issue 165, released in November of 1963, the original Circe briefly turns him into a lion man, and even a mouse man, before using her magic to put him under her control for a while. She also asks Superman to marry her, and he again declines. I guess Circe's bloodline is just like really into Superman. In 2008, 50 years after the first Super Lion story, DC would pay tribute to the story as they released a Superman action figure with an interchangeable lion head. Scandalgate. Elseworld's 80-page giant, released in August of 1999, included a short Elseworld story titled Scandalgate, written by Tom Peyer. This story sees Superman as the President of the United States, except his presidential career isn't really doing so great, as he's currently being impeached for, well, not really sure, they don't really say. The story is literally only 2 pages long, but it doesn't actually tell you why Superman's being impeached. Though it seems like it's not that serious of an impeachment, as the only people who seem to really want his impeachment are Superman's enemies, like Lex Luthor, Doomsday, Brainiac, Satanus, Parasite, Bizarro, Silver Banshee, etc. This entire story is actually a parody of President Bill Clinton's impeachment in 1998. Super Martian. First appearing in the Multiversity issue 1, released in October of 2014, this is an alternate version of Superman and Martian Manhunter. He's both Martian and Kryptonian, so he has the powers of both species, such as super strength, speed, and telepathy. He's part of the Justice Titans, his universe's version of the Justice League, along with the Superman of the Multiverse, and is dating his universe's version of Batman, who's a combo of Bruce Wayne and Lex Luthor. And honestly, that's kind of it. He's only appeared a handful of times. Cancelled The Adventures of Superboy TV show. In 1961, a pilot was filmed for a show titled The Adventures of Superboy. This show was created to capitalize on the success of the series Adventures of Superman, which ended 3 years earlier in 1958, though it's unknown if this show is intended to be a prequel to it. The pilot tells the story of Superboy defeating the ABC gang. The pilot wasn't picked up, and the show never filmed any more material, despite there being 12 more scripts being completed. Though like the Super Pup series, this pilot has been released, though only in the Smallville The Complete Series box set. However, there is actually another way to view this pilot. In Superboy issue 88, released in April 1961, a story is featured titled The Saddest Boy in Smallville, which is directly based on the failed pilot. Elseworld's Finest, Supergirl and Batgirl. Released in September of 1998 and written by Barbara Kessel, Matt Haley, and Tom Simmons, Elseworld's Finest, Supergirl and Batgirl is an Elseworld story that basically tells the story of what if Superman and Batman were women. Well, I mean, kinda. Instead of Bruce Wayne and Kal-El being Batman and Superman, Bruce Wayne isn't a superhero in this universe, but is instead a billionaire who's Batgirl's boyfriend, while Kal-El was abducted by Lex Luthor while a baby, and was used in Lexcorp's bioelectric research. So he's dead. And so it's Kara, who was adopted by Wonder Woman in this universe, who's taken over as the main Kryptonian hero, while Batgirl is Barbara Gordon, whose parents were killed by hitmen hired by Lex Luthor. The story starts out with Batgirl forcing Gotham City to be sealed off from the rest of the world in order to keep it safe from metahumans. She's however forced to have some metahumans enter Gotham as the Justice Society is escorting Lex Luthor to give a speech at a ceremony. Once there, Joker takes some venom and attempts to kill Lex Luthor under orders from Emil Hamilton. They kidnap Luthor, which causes Batgirl and Supergirl to team up to find him. They eventually find the three villains and battle it out. There, they're able to defeat the villains, and Batgirl is able to expose Lex Luthor to the rest of the world, destroying his reputation. Now with the three villains behind bars, well, two of them as Lex Luthor was able to buy his way out of prison, Batgirl and Supergirl have become the best of friends. Also in this universe, Elvis Presley is the President of the United States. Didn't know where to throw that in, so there you go. Krypton Season 3. Krypton is a show that I keep forgetting happened, lasting 20 episodes from March 21st, 2018 to August 14th, 2019 on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was a show about Superman's grandfather, Segel, and Krypton's downfall, though it also had a lot of time travel elements in the show, so it was about a lot of things. It featured a lot of characters, like Doomsday, Brainiac, General Zod, and even Lobo. After a mixed first season and a fairly positive received second season, Sci-Fi canceled the series, though a third season was already being outlined when it was canceled. According to Cameron Welsh, Krypton's showrunner, Season 3 was going to be about Brainiac on Earth, raising Jor-El to be a superweapon. Red kryptonite would then be used on Kryptonians, resulting in an illness that would make them fertile, known as Virus X. This virus would be created by a sentient AI named Oracle. General Zod would willingly be sent to the Phantom Zone. Various Hawk people would be introduced, notably a woman named Nisa, aka Hawk Woman. The Eradicator would be introduced and battle Doomsday. And finally, the season would end with General Zod leaving the Phantom Zone with Nod and Ursa. I'll leave a link to an Instagram post detailing more stuff about Season 3 in the description below. Riot. First appearing in Superman the Man of Steel, issue 61, released in October of 1996, Frederick von Frankenstein was your average guy born into a family of scientists. He was put under a ton of pressure to succeed in both school and his career. So after a while, he snapped and was like, okay, I'm gonna make two of me so that I can do things faster and better. He went on to use his uncle's phase shifter, and it kinda worked. The phase shifter awakened a gene in him that allowed him to duplicate himself. It also really messed up his face, so he permanently looks like a skeleton, and made him unable to ever sleep, which drove him insane. Because of all this, he was thrown out of his home and began doing crime under the name Riot. Superman would quickly learn that anytime any damage was done to Riot, he would just create a clone of himself. Although, to call them clones isn't quite accurate, as technically, they're all him. It's just one collective consciousness that controls them all. Because of this, all damage or pain he takes gets spread across all the bodies that he currently has active. But he also gets more powerful when he has more bodies, so all that damage and pain doesn't really impact him. Riot would return to the New 52 universe in Green Team Teen Trillionaires issue 1, released in July of 2013. A comic run that I literally had no idea existed until now. Riot would also go on to appear in Superman Batman Public Enemies, and the Superman Returns video game. Also, this dude is extremely similar to Twice from My Hero Academia. I can't be the only one that sees it. Superman becomes Nova. In World's Finest, issue 178, released in September of 1968, Superman loses his powers. This makes him pretty upset, despite Batman, Robin, and Green Arrow trying to cheer him up, being like, it's okay not to have any powers. I mean, we don't have any powers, and look how well we're doing. But Superman still isn't really taking it well, and so takes up a new superhero identity called the Nova. The Nova's whole gimmick is that he uses his cape to fight. So think the Cape. God, I've always wanted to reference that on this channel. Does anybody remember that show? Hell, did anyone watch it? Anyways, Clark runs into some issues while being Nova. Notably, he keeps forgetting to use his full strength, as now that he doesn't have super strength anymore, he can punch people as hard as he wants. Because of this, he gets beaten up and is captured by the villain, Socrates. And Socrates is just like, you're gonna work for me, or we're gonna tell the world that not only is Nova Clark Kent, but also Superman was. The story continues in World's Finest issue 180, released in November of 1968. In this issue, Clark gets a mind control device implanted in his neck, and Socrates has him face off against Batman and Robin. Also, he has him going back to being Superman. Batman and Robin are able to defeat Superman and free him from the mind control. Meanwhile, Socrates puts a bomb in the Batcave, but is killed by the very same bomb as he tries to escape the Batcave when Batman, Robin, and Superman show up to stop him. Superman then gives up the Nova mantle and decides to continue being Superman even without his powers. But it turns out this was all an imaginary story that takes place in an alternate continuity, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. The Hobby Robber. Featured exclusively in Action Comics issue 73, released in June 1944, the Hobby Robber, aka Lucius Spruce, is a criminal who specializes in stealing bizarre objects and demanding a ransom for their return. No, really, that's it. That's his whole gimmick. If it's bizarre, he wants it. In order to draw him out, Clark convinces Lois Lane to write an article about how much he loves to collect antique clocks. Something that he actually does love doing, at least exclusively in this issue, as this is never mentioned again in the near 100-year history of the character. Anyways, this makes Hobby Robber want to steal his clocks, so he shows up at Clark's apartment to steal the clocks. Luckily, Clark was waiting as Superman, and so he beats them up. Except no, that's actually not what happens. That would have happened. However, right before this whole thing happened, Clark spots Lois Lane hiding in his grandfather clock in order to get a scoop for the Daily Planet. So Clark can't turn into Superman without her figuring out his identity. And so the two are captured by Hobby Robber and are almost fed to his giant carnivorous plants that I guess he just has. My headcanon is that he got these from Poison Ivy, even though she wouldn't be created for another 22 years. Clark is then able to become Superman and takes them out. And as you expect, Hobby Robber has never appeared in anything ever again. There is another Hobby Robber who fights Batman, but he's a completely different character. Where is Thy Sting? Released in 2001 and written by J.M. DeMatteis, Superman, Where is Thy Sting is a one-shot story that tells the story of Superman's immortality. Because of this immortality, he outlives Lois Lane, which makes him understandably pretty sad. But he doesn't have much time to mourn, as Lex Luthor then shows up and reveals that he was in love with Lois, and that he could have killed Superman before, but he didn't, due to his feelings for Lois. Superman then beats him up, and it's revealed that Luthor's just a robot now. That's when Death itself shows up. Yeah, the Grim Reaper himself shows up to torment Superman for a bit, because he wants to kill Superman, but it's impossible for him. Death gives him a bunch of visions, like the future of the Earth being destroyed by the sun, the universe ending, Lois Lane dying again, and, it's a lot for Superman. But then it's revealed that this was all just a dream. Kinda. Superman thinks it was a dream, but Death knows that it actually happened, and is actually thankful for Superman's immortality, as it apparently filled his empty soul. This is a really weird story, but it's got some amazing art. Legacy. In Action Comics Annual, issue 6, released in September 1994, an Elseworld story written by John Bryan is featured that tells the story of Kal-El living on Earth in the 1970s. Except history is a little bit different. You see, in this universe, one of his ancestors named Kal-El arrived on Earth during the American Revolutionary War and takes part in it, on the side of the British Empire. So the British win the war, and Kal-El is just like, wait a second, why don't I just take over the world? And so he does, and the world bows to him. He's even got little Superman armbands. Now back to Kal. While he's related to Kal-El, he's actually not purely Kryptonian, as generations of species mixing has left him with more human DNA than Kryptonian DNA. He's also just, not very happy with the whole regime thing, especially after witnessing his friends trying to R-word this universe's Lois Lane. Also, his dad was executed by Kal-El, so he's got a couple of pretty solid reasons not to really like the regime. Anyways, he joins up with a rebel group that Lois Lane is a part of, and dies. He dies. Dude confronts Kal-El and is like, dude, I don't think we should do the Kryptonian Empire thing on Earth. That's pretty bad. Earth isn't Krypton. We should let Earth have its own legacy, not just do Krypton again. And some soldiers just start blasting and he dies. Surprisingly, this little speech convinces Kal-El that he was in the wrong, and he changes his ways after burying Kal-El in the sun. And by changing his ways, I mean he just leaves Earth. His regime's still there. Would have been nice if he went back and took it down, but I guess he was busy flying in space. Anyways, the rebels celebrate and the world is free. Probably, I think. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. This is a Broadway musical that was released in 1966. It tells the story of Superman battling Dr. Abner Sedgwick, a scientist who wants revenge on the scientific world after they refused to give him a Nobel Prize 10 times in a row. It was actually very positively received during its initial run, but it made absolutely no money, and for a while was Broadway's single biggest flop. The musical would make a comeback in 1975 when it was adapted into a TV special. This TV special was significantly different though, as not only did it change a lot of the script, some of the villains were changed, and 4 different musical numbers were removed from the story entirely, though a new song was created in their place. This special was very poorly received, and for over 30 years, the musical would be forgotten by most people. That was until 2007, when the musical would finally make a significant comeback as a concert instead of a play. This concert was actually fairly well received, and so the play was resurrected in 2010, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016, with the final 3 years being done in Europe, twice in the UK and once in Germany. Rainbow powers. In Superman issue 125, released in November of 1958, Superman discovers an alien ship underneath Metropolis that's causing earthquakes. When Superman touches the ship, it explodes instantly. This explosion really messes with him, as soon afterwards, he realizes that his standard powers, except for flight, have disappeared, and now all he can do is fire rainbow beams from his hands that cause people to instantly surrender. Except that's not actually what they are. While it looks like he's firing rainbows, he's actually shooting out a mini Superman out of his hands that forces criminals to surrender. And this really ticks Superman off, as he's annoyed that all of his original powers have been transferred into that little mini-me, and that the press is more focused on the mini-Superman than the original. The final straw for Clark is when the mini-Superman starts to stop crime all by himself, without the original Superman knowing. Thankfully for Superman, this mini-me ends up dying after sacrificing its life to save Superman from some kryptonite. This causes all of his powers to transfer back into him, and he loses that weird mini rainbow mini-me power. Superman, True Brit. Released in October 2004 and written by John Cleese, Superman, True Brit is basically what if Superman landed in England instead of Kansas. It's also just non-stop British jokes and British stereotypes. The story goes that Kal-El lands in England and is found by the Clark family, who raise him as Colin Clark. As Colin grows up, his powers begin to get stronger, which causes a lot of issues for his family. Eventually, he's able to get his powers under control, for the most part, and travels to university. He also impales a dude with a cricket bat by accident, and I was going to show you the image of him doing that, but it's weirdly, extremely graphic for a comedy story. Colin then meets this universe's Lois Lane and Perry White, and joins the tabloid company, the Daily Smear, a not-so-subtle parody of the Daily Star. Life seems to be going pretty well for Colin, except for the whole cricket incident. After a while, Colin decides to use his powers for good, and becomes Superman, with an extremely bad costume. Overall, Superman True Brit is a very unique take on the character. Match. First appearing in Superboy issue 35, released in January 1997, Match is the result of what happens when you clone a clone. You see, the evil secret organization, the Agenda, cloned Superboy, which created Match. But since Superboy was a clone of Superman, Match is a clone of a clone. After battling Superboy for a bit and losing, he was thought to be dead for some time, until the Agenda kidnapped Superboy and replaced him with Match. And so Match became a member of the Young Justice for a little bit, until Superboy broke free and defeated him. Match would show up a handful of times afterwards, but with every appearance, he got more and more gross looking and dumber. This is because of the whole clone of a clone situation. His mind and body began to rot after a while, and so eventually, he began to look and act like Bizarro. He would continue to be a threat to Superboy, until he was eventually killed by Superboy Prime. Match would make his first appearance in the New 52 universe, in Avengers Endgame Himself Squad issue 1, released in May 2021. And he pretty much has the same backstory. Agenda created a clone of Superboy, and now his mind and body are deteriorating. However, unlike his original self, this Match is actually a good guy instead of a villain. This is because Match, for a while, believed that he was the actual Superboy. Even faced with the real Superboy, he refused to believe that he was a clone of a clone. It was also revealed here that Amanda Waller was making clones of Match. So, a clone of a clone of a clone? When it comes to Match's powers, he's got your standard Superman or Superboy abilities, like flight, super strength, super speed, etc. As for right now, Match has only appeared in one piece of media outside of the comics, that being Young Justice. JLA, Shogun of Steel. Released in April 2002 and written by Ben Robb, JLA, Shogun of Steel is an Elseworld story set in feudal Japan in the 14th century. In this universe, Kal-El lands on Earth, but instead of Kansas, he lands in Japan, where he grows up as a Buddhist, and eventually joins a group of rebels to battle against the corrupt government run by Lord Zuno, aka Brainiac, who's also a robot. He meets these rebels after saving their leader, Komori, who's this universe's Batman, or Batgirl, or Batwoman, one of the three. Kal-El, or as he's known in this universe, Hoshi, has most of Superman's standard abilities. He's also got some serious skills with a sword. However, when it comes to Brainiac, the whole sword thing doesn't really work, as Brainiac has a sword made out of kryptonite, so the whole sword dual angle isn't really going to work here. But he still tries. He's eventually able to defeat Brainiac with the help of his rebel friends. The way he defeats Brainiac is really brutal. I mean, he literally throws him into the sun. Remember, Brainiac's a robot in this story, so Hoshi's technically not killing anyone. And so, Hoshi and the Justice League then swear to defend Japan from all who try to harm it. I'm really surprised that this hasn't gotten an anime adaptation yet. You'd think after Batman Ninja, DC would greenlight a Shogun of Steel film, but I mean, I guess not. The Superman Revenge Squad. First appearing in The Adventures of Superman issue 543, released in February of 1997, the Superman Revenge Squad is pretty much Superman's version of the Sinister Six. After being defeated again and again, various villains are brought in by Morgan Edge to work together to take down Superman. This squad doesn't really do too well, as they just can't get along, and so they fail. Morgan Edge would then revive the team with new members, and the team would fail again. But then Lex Luthor rolled in and created his own version of the team with new members to battle General Zod. The villains who have been a part of this team include Maxima, Bizarro, Anomaly, Barrage, Bod, Metallo, Riot, Rock, Parasite, Misa, and Superman. Yes, Superman himself joined the team to fight off Zod. In the post-New 52 universe, this team was brought back in Action Comics issue 978, released in June 2017, with a much more powerful team consisting of Cyborg Superman, General Zod, Eradicator, Metallo, Mongol, and Blank. Who's Blank? He's some guy that Superman beat up in the New 52 and just randomly showed back up as part of a team consisting of some of Superman's most well-known and powerful villains. It's like if Iguana was part of the Sinister Six. I should also mention here that the Morgan Edge version of the team wasn't actually the first group to be called the Superman Revenge Squad. In Superboy issue 94, released in January of 1962, the world of DC was introduced to a group of alien criminals and warlords who went by the name Superman Revenge Squad, and surprisingly appeared quite a few times. In fact, this group has the most appearances out of every single group calling themselves the Superman Revenge Squad. Lois Lane gets spanked. In Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, issue 14, released in January of 1960, Lois Lane is hanging out at the Fortress of Solitude, and wants to prove to Superman that if they got married, that she'd be safe living there. So, she takes a look through a powerful telescope that gives her some star ray poisoning, and Superman's just like, I literally just told you a second ago not to do that. Why would you do that? And so, she now has to stay there for 3 days, until the star rays wear off. She's just chilling out at an anti-gravity couch, when suddenly a gust of air sends the couch flying, and she's sent crashing into a Superman robot that instantly starts spanking her. That robot presumably spanked her for quite a while, as she literally can't sit down the next morning. But then later, it's revealed that the gust of air was from Superman, who then used his X-ray vision to guide the spanking robot towards Lois. This whole thing was just him trying to convince Lois Lane that living at the Fortress of Solitude would be bad for her. This was also probably the author's poorly disguised fetish. The Master Jailer. First appearing in Superman issue 331, released in January of 1979, Carl Draper was once madly in love with Lana Lang, and so hated Superman, since Lana was obsessed with him. This led to an obsession with Superman, after several attempts at trying to win over Lana failed. Over time, Carl would become a security expert that would create prisons and security systems for companies and, well, prisons. He'd end up creating the prison Mount Olympus Correctional Facility. Superman thought he did a pretty great job, and so suggested the prison to be named after Kal-El. But the press ignored that and called it Superman's Island instead of Draper's Island. To make matters worse, the reporter who came up with that name was Lana Lang herself. This was the final straw for Kal-El, as he then became the villain, the Master Jailer. Armed with a keychain that absorbs the powers of others, a variety of different holograms, and his expert-level knowledge of traps, security systems, and prisons, Master Jailer battled Superman several times. In the post-New 52 universe, he would make his debut in The Squad issue 45, released in October 2018, where he'd be forced to join the Squad during a mission to destroy Atlantis. He would then die a few issues later. When it comes to different pieces of media and continuities, Master Jailer has shown up in the Smallville Season 11 comics and in Supergirl, which I'd say is surprising, but the Arrowverse seems to really love using Bronze and Silver Age villains. Distant Fires. Written by Howard Chaykin and released in 1998, Superman Distant Fires is an Elseworld story that tells a fun little story about the aftermath of a nuclear war. Because of the massive amount of radiation that's killing the planet, all of the surviving superheroes and villains no longer have any powers. This includes Superman, who is pretty much the sole survivor of Metropolis, with the story beginning with him burying Lois Lane, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, and Batman. Clark lives in the ruins of Metropolis with a giant cat named Kryptonite, and fully expects to live a lonely life fighting giant rats. He reunites with Wonder Woman, who's part of a group of survivors consisting of Guy Gardner, Wally West, Cheetah, Billy Batson, Big Barda, Martian Manhunter, Mr. Miracle, and Joker, who was made sane because of the nuclear war. Superman and Wonder Woman then fall in love, which really ticks off Billy Batson, because apparently he and Wonder Woman at one point were dating. Very weird. Like he's an adult now, but I mean, she knew him when he was a kid, but he was like transformed into an adult at the time, so it's complicated and weird. Anyways, for years, Billy Batson plans his revenge, as he slowly gets his powers back by saying Shazam every night. This causes the magic Shazam lightning to zap him, but it also slowly gives everybody else back their powers. Eventually, he discovers Metallo, and the two team up to take down Superman. A big old battle happens, and Wonder Woman is killed by Shazam himself. Clark then realizes that Shazam's magic lightning he's been calling down every night has been actually killing the Earth, and now the planet is set to blow up. So he quickly becomes a Green Lantern using the dead Guy Gardner's ring, and uses it to create a spaceship for his and Wonder Woman's son, Bruce Kent. He launches Bruce into space, and that's the end. They all just are destined to die on Earth. Moral of the story? Nuclear war? It's pretty bad. Mr. Z. First appearing in Superman issue 51, released in January of 1991, Mr. Z is an immortal being that loves to collect souls and gems, like he's playing Skyrim. He attempted to capture Superman's soul, but due to him being an alien, it blew up the gem and knocked Mr. Z out. During this confrontation, Mr. Z mentioned to Superman how they had first met each other during World War II, which really confused Superman because this version of the character landed on Earth well after the Second World War. This mystery would be solved when Superman was then transported back in time to Germany in 1943, where he saves a family from a German general. This general, turns out, is Mr. Z. And Mr. Z was just about to finish an atomic weapon for the Axis powers. Superman, of course, stops him, and Mr. Z uses a prototype atomic bomb to send Superman back through time to present day. And that's kind of it. As of right now, Mr. Z hasn't appeared in the post-New 52 universe. In fact, outside of one other story about him being trapped on a tropical prehistoric island with Superman, and a bunch of cavemen, including a really hot cave woman named Lola La, he hasn't really done much. Although I should mention here that Mr. Z's first appearance may not have actually been Superman issue 51, but instead Superman issue 19, released in December of 1942. Because in this story, Superman battles a criminal who attempts to murder Lois Lane and a random dog. This criminal is named Oscar Lanchester, and his supervillain name is Mr. Z. I don't think the two are related at all, but it is weird how there's two different Superman villains named Mr. Z. Real World Superman, released in June 2000 and written by Steve Vance, Real World Superman is an alternate universe one-shot that tells the story of Eddie Dial, a nerdy store clerk living in the 1960s. He has a rivalry with a street punk named Pete, and after confronting Pete for being a bad boyfriend to Betty, a girl that Eddie likes, Pete beats the crap out of him. But instead of beating him to a pulp, Pete brings him to a bar and basically makes Eddie drink until he passes out. When he wakes up, he's got a Superman tattoo on his chest. And for whatever reason, everyone in town turns against Eddie and are disgusted and angered by the Superman tattoo. Wanting revenge on Pete, Eddie breaks into his apartment, only to then be arrested and sent to prison, where he's almost beaten to death for the Superman tattoo. While in prison, the warden offers him a deal: join him in stopping crime, and he can be let go. Eddie takes the deal and immediately beats up Pete, and quickly, the Superman tattoo becomes a symbol against crime. Eventually, though, he starts getting soft on crime, which really annoys the higher-ups of the prison. So they turn on Eddie, sending him into a trap, and he's almost beaten to death. Years later, Eddie passes away due to a heart attack, right after writing his life story, which is what the comic was. Titano the Super Ape. First appearing in Superman issue 127, released in February of 1959, Toto the chimpanzee was your average chimp. That was until he was launched into space one day as part of an experiment. There in space, Toto witnessed a kryptonite meteorite smash into a uranium meteorite, and all that radiation from the collision was absorbed into Toto. Now, in real life, Toto would have gotten an extremely painful and slow death, but since this is a comic book, Toto returned to Earth and is fine. Until he starts to grow to the size of a kaiju, kidnap Lois Lane, and starts terrorizing Metropolis as Titano the Super Ape. Superman would come in and battle the King Kong knockoff, only to discover that Titano had the ability to fire kryptonite beams from his eyes. Lois Lane would then trick Titano into wearing oversized lead-lined glasses, which would then allow Superman to beat him up. And by beat him up, I mean throw Titano back in time to prehistoric Earth. There, poor Toto would stay for the rest of his life. Toto would return in the New 52 universe in Superman issue 3, released in January 2012, and he has a new origin story, being the result of genetic mutations by a mad scientist. Toto, or Titano, has appeared in various different pieces of media, like Superman the Animated Series, Justice League Action, the 1988 Superman cartoon, and the New Adventures of Superman. Cryptothrax. Only appearing in Tales from the Dark Multiverse, Dark Knight's Metal, released in February of 2021, this creature known as Cryptothrax is actually Superman. You see, in this universe, the Element X armor that the Justice League wore in Dark Knight's Metal ended up corrupting them and turning them all into monstrous beasts. Cryptothrax would eventually be killed in a battle with Nightwing, who stabs him with a kryptonite guitar pick. And that's it. Just a really gross Superman monster that dies because of a guitar pick. Superman Kal. Released in March of 1995 and written by Dave Gibbons, Superman Kal is an Elseworld story about what if Superman landed in the Middle Ages. Here, Kal works as a blacksmith for a while, and eventually meets Lady Lois, this universe's version of Lois Lane. The two fall in love, and eventually Kal asks her to marry him. All is going well, until Baron Luther shows up and is like, "Hey Kal, congrats on the wedding, that's pretty awesome. But did you know about the rule of where the Baron or the king of the land gets to bang the bride on a wedding night? It's a pretty cool rule." Not wanting to be cucked, battles Luther, but is easily defeated because Luther's armor has kryptonite on it that he found in Kal's crashed baby spaceship. Upon waking up the next day, Kal discovers that Luthor had taken Lois, attempted to R-word her, and then when that failed, beat her to death. Yeah, the story takes a fairly dark turn here. And so, Kal decides to kill Luthor and storms his castle with an entire mob of rioters. During this battle, he takes boiling oil to the face and just shrugs it off. The two duel and end up killing each other. Kal is then buried alongside his would-be wife, and his sword goes on to become Excalibur. Not the happiest Superman story, that's for sure. The Super 7. Adventures of Superman Annual 6, released in August of 1994, introduced an alternate universe called the Super 7. This Elseworld story takes place in a universe where Earth has been invaded and enslaved by an alien empire known as the Malazarem. They were only able to take over the Earth when they announced to the planet, hey, if we see a metahuman, we're gonna kill 1,000 civilians. This turned the people of Earth against every single hero out there. Mostly because Hal Jordan then led a team of heroes to free Coast City from the aliens. They succeeded, but in response the aliens killed 7 million people, including Lois Lane. And so the heroes of the world would go into hiding while the aliens took over. With the heroes gone, Lex Luthor and some other non-metahumans attempted to defeat the aliens. They were slaughtered, with Lex just barely surviving and becoming a being called Metallics. Eventually, Lana Lang becomes the Director of Human Relations, which is kind of weird that they would have that position when the rest of humanity is enslaved. Like what relations are they having with the aliens, you know? But it turns out that Lana is actually helping a growing resistance movement. Teaming up with Jimmy Olsen, the pair are able to locate and convince Superman to return to the resistance. Superman eventually agrees to join them, and then they recruit Wonder Woman, Batman, Superboy, Hal Jordan, and Wally West to the cause. Together with Lex Luthor, they become the Super 7, a group of heroes who work with the Resistance to free Earth from the alien invaders. They eventually succeed in saving humanity, but in the process, Superman, Wally West, Wonder Woman, and Batman all die. Superboy, Lex, and Hal Jordan are all that remains of the team. And so the Super 7 becomes the Super 3. But then Hal Jordan leaves to locate more metahumans, so it becomes the Super 2. Matrix. First appearing in Superman issue 16, released in April of 1988, Matrix is a very weird character. Remember how I said earlier in the video that at one point DC really wanted Superman to be the sole survivor of Krypton? While it affected the DCAU, it really affected the comics, as when a new Supergirl was introduced, she couldn't be from Krypton. So instead of coming up with an explanation like, oh, she's from another world that was like a Kryptonian colony world, it was decided that she would be a shape-shifting creature known as Matrix. Matrix was created by Lex Luthor from a pocket dimension. Matrix would then be sent into the main series DC universe by Pocket Dimension Lex in order to recruit Superman to help them battle some Kryptonian criminals rampaging in the Pocket Dimension. Superman would help out, but the Pocket Dimension would end up being wiped out. Now orphaned, Superman invited Matrix to live in the main DC universe, where she'd take up the mantle of Supergirl. And like I mentioned earlier, would begin dating Lex Luthor's son, who was actually just Lex Luthor in disguise. She would continue to be Supergirl for quite a long time, until eventually she merged herself into a dying woman named Linda Danvers. Matrix's story would continue, but only in the body of Linda Danvers. Supergirl, the Earth-born Angel. First appearing in Supergirl issue 1, released in September of 1996, Linda Danvers, like I said, merged with Matrix and became Supergirl. Linda's life before becoming Supergirl was very dark, as originally she was just a normal person who would eventually begin dating a cultist named Buzz, and he had her join his cult. This would lead to her doing some pretty horrible things, and eventually be kidnapped by Buzz and murdered as part of a ritual. That's when Matrix showed up and fused with her. Linda was now forced to live with two different minds and memories, hers and Matrix's, which wasn't something easy, but she would eventually be able to live with it. She would continue to be the main Supergirl for quite a while, and in her final years, she would be separated from Matrix, but was able to keep the Supergirl powers. But she wasn't able to keep her Earthborn Angel fire powers. Oh, did I not mention that? When Matrix merged with Linda, she became the Earthborn Angel of Fire. It turns out, when two beings are merged together at the point of death and beyond all hope, they become an Earthborn Angel. As the Angel of Fire, she was given new powers like teleportation, flame vision, and was even given wings made of fire. Like I said earlier, she would be separated from Matrix, so she would lose these powers and the status of being an Earthborn Angel, but she was one for quite a while. With her spending so much time as both Supergirl and an Angel of Fire, she spent a lot of time in both the standard superhero side of DC and the supernatural side.
You're watching Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Lex Luthor has Superman trapped. He's using kryptonite to destroy his powers.
Now you'll tell me why Superman peanut butter tastes so great. Never. So fresh roasted, so creamy, so yummy. Then its secret will be mine, all mine. I foiled again. Just wait, Superman. I'll find out.
Superman peanut butter. Its strength is its great taste.
We now return to Superman Saturday on Boomerang.
Superman Emergency Squad. First appearing in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, issue 48, released in November of 1960, the Superman Emergency Squad is a group of Kryptonians who live in the shrunken city of Kandor, who will occasionally come out of the city to help Superman or Supergirl. They all look identical to Superman, and pretty much have all of Superman's abilities. Though because they all live in the city of Kandor, they're all extremely small. There was even a Supergirl emergency squad created at one point, made up entirely of Supergirl's fan club. There was even once a Bizarro emergency squad, after Bizarro cloned Kandor. Cancelled Krypton spin-off show. In June 2019, it was announced that Krypton would be receiving a spin-off series based on Lobo. It would be produced by Cameron Welsh and star Emmett J. Scanlan as Lobo. However, 2 months after it was announced, Krypton was cancelled alongside the spin-off series, so it didn't really have much of a life. Supergirl becomes a werewolf. In Adventure Comics issue 387, released in December of 1969, a woman named Dr. Sanford tells Supergirl that she'll make a serum that'll make her immune to kryptonite. Supergirl tries it out, and it actually works. But it also turns her into a werewolf. Well, not a complete werewolf, because she doesn't immediately maul Dr. Sanford, but she looks like one. So she continues her normal life as best as she can. She even has a human mask made for her. Shortly after this, some astronauts need saving, and so Superman goes and saves them. But the rocket explodes, which somehow opens up a rift in space and time. An alternate universe Supergirl then enters through the rift, and it's revealed that in her reality, Earth 387, everybody looks like a werewolf. And when the Supergirl of that world took the same serum that this universe's Supergirl took, it also made her immune to kryptonite, but it made her look like a normal human. Dr. Sanford from the normal universe and the furry universe then compare notes and create a serum that turns their Supergirls back to normal. The werewolf Supergirl returns to her reality and the day is saved. But what about the rift in space-time? Well, Supergirl is able to seal it shut with her heat vision, because that's a thing that Kryptonians can do apparently. By the way, Dr. Sanford and Earth 387 never appear or are mentioned again. Side note, Superman has this weird alien friend millions of light years away from Earth. It's never explained who he is, and he never shows up again, but I think he looks pretty funny. Brother Eye Superman. First appearing in the New 52 Future's End FCBD Special Edition, released in June 2014, this alternate universe version of Superman is a cyborg zombie controlled by the rogue AI Brother Eye. In this universe, Brother Eye was created by Batman and Mr. Terrific to protect humanity. But like so many other rogue AI stories, Brother Eye comes to the conclusion that humanity is the ultimate threat against humanity, so it begins to kill every single humanoid on the planet. But instead of just leaving them dead, Brother Eye uses nanomachines to revive the dead and turn them into obedient cyborg zombie soldiers. Pretty much everybody in this universe is either killed or turned into cyborgs. Blue Beetle, Jon Stewart, Barry Allen, Captain Cold, Grifter, Wonder Woman, Booster Gold, Zatanna, Aquaman, and yes, even Superman. As a cyborg zombie, this Superman still has a decent amount of his old abilities. However, his new nanotech gives him a ton of abilities he didn't have before, like an arm cannon and super intelligence. He's also got 4 robotic walker legs, which is pretty cool. Superman Peanut Butter. In 1981, Sunnyland Refining Company and DC Comics teamed up to produce Superman Peanut Butter. This was actually DC's first ever licensing deal for a brand of food. This was a fairly new food company though, so DC, Warner Bros., and Sunnyland themselves were a bit worried that this peanut butter brand wouldn't be able to compete with the other, far more popular established brands. Their worries were put to rest, as when Superman Peanut Butter made it to store shelves, it became a huge hit. This was because, while Sunnyland wasn't really a super well-known brand, Superman was. And so, people just bought it because they liked Superman. Despite it being fairly popular, they stopped producing it in the late 1980s. As for the food itself, it wasn't really anything special apparently. It was just your standard peanut butter. Though according to the commercials, it had great strength that came from its taste. Kryptonian laws. In Action Comics issue 289, released in June 1962, Supergirl decides that she wants to play matchmaker for Superman because she thinks that he'll never find love. So she travels back in time to arrange a meeting between Superman and Helen of Troy because she's the daughter of Zeus and was known at the time for being the most beautiful woman ever. This doesn't really work out at all, so Supergirl then takes Superman to the future, where she's like, "You should go date Saturn Girl." And so Superman starts making out with her, only for Lightning Man to show up and say, "Dude, that's my wife." So the duo return to their time, and Superman tells her that if he wants to get married, it would have to be with someone who's as super and lovable as Supergirl. But we can't get married because we're cousins. There are certain countries where that's allowed, but on Krypton, that's unlawful. Superman then leaves and Supergirl's like, "Okay, I'll use the computers in the Fortress of Solitude to find Superman a perfect girlfriend." I'm just going to stop real quick and say that this is one of the weirdest interactions in all of comics. Anyways, she's able to discover a woman who would be perfect for Superman, named Luma Line from the far-off planet of Starl. Turns out that Luma is a superpowered being that looks just like Supergirl if she was a little bit older. And the pair actually hit it off pretty well, until they discover that the sun's yellow solar rays are killing her. So Luma is forced to return to her homeworld, and Supergirl gives up trying to get Superman laid. Decades later, in JLA JSA, Virtue and Vice, written by Jeff Johns and David S. Goyer, and released in February 2003, Power Girl randomly makes out with Superman, which confuses the hell out of him. Now, why did she do this? Well, it wasn't her. Well, I mean, it was her, but it was the villain Lust. No, not that Lust. Possessing Power Girl. Still weird. Very weird, but not as weird as if she was, like, in full control. Does this Kryptonian cousin-law include alternate universe versions? Would that even count? I don't know. Let's just hope that DC Comics never does anything like this again, because this is just really weird. Jeb Bush. In October of 2015, US presidential candidate and political loser Jeb Bush was asked who his favorite Marvel heroes were. Instead of answering the question, he said he would like to own Marvel because of his love for capitalism, and he liked the movies. He then said Batman was his favorite, and that Melissa Benoist's Supergirl was hot. In response to this, Melissa Benoist stated that she doesn't really know what to think of this quote, and that she's glad that Jeb Bush is excited to watch the show. I don't think he did, though. I'll be completely honest with you, this doesn't really fit on the Superman Iceberg, but I thought this was really funny, and it's my video, so it's going in.
Please clap.
Genndy Tartakovsky Superman cartoon. In 2013, animation legend Genndy Tartakovsky was hired by Warner Bros. And Cartoon Network to develop a series of Superman shorts for the Cartoon Network block DC Nation. Sadly, the project never made it past concept art, as the project was cancelled early in development. Superman meets Al Capone. In Superman issue 142, released in January of 1961, while attempting to travel back in time to figure out Titano's height so that Perry White can write a story for the Daily Planet, Superman ends up landing in the 1920s because of Titano's kryptonite vision. So Superman is stuck in the 1920s for a while until the kryptonite wears off. While in the 1920s, he disguises himself as a gangster and is hired by Al Capone. And so, Clark plans to stop Al Capone by acting as a double agent. messing with his plans from the inside. While working under Al Capone, Superman has to fake a cop's death and deliver illegal bootleg alcohol. It's all going pretty well, until the criminal that Superman has been pretending to be, Vincent, is mentioned on a radio, stating how he's in jail. Al Capone and the rest of the gangsters then instantly jump to the conclusion that Superman is an FBI informant, and try to kill him. Superman's just like, alright, I give up. I guess I'll just let him get arrested for tax evasion. Superman then leaves the 1920s, and Al Capone is eventually arrested for tax evasion. Unforgiven. Released in May 1994 and written by Christopher Priest, Unforgiven is an Elseworld story that tells the story of what would happen if the Kryptonian Empire invaded Earth and occupied the planet. In this universe, Kal-El is originally part of the Kryptonian Empire, but after spending years of hearing about various war crimes and authoritarian actions being enacted by the Empire, Kal eventually turns against his own people and sides with Batman, who is one of Earth's final freedom fighters. Bruce has been fighting the good fight for roughly 30 years at this point, so he's a much older Batman. And speaking of old folks, the Kents also exist in this universe, and they're just one of the many, many slaves forced to work for their Kryptonian overlords. Anyways, once Batman is captured by Lex Luthor, who is siding with the occupying forces against his own people, he's freed by Superman. As a freedom fighter, Kal-El takes up the mantle of Superman and teams up with fellow resistance fighters like Lois Lane, and is eventually forced to face off against Luthor and his own father, Jor-El. Honestly surprised that Kal-El didn't turn against the Kryptonians sooner. I mean, they forced him to wear this every day, like, what is this? Lex Luthor kills Abraham Lincoln. In Superboy issue 85, released in December of 1960, Clark attends an event in honor of Abraham Lincoln Day. While there, he's like, what if I were to save him? So he travels back in time to 1865 and attempts to find Lincoln. Instead of fighting the president, he discovers Lex Luthor, who's got some red kryptonite on him. It turns out he's here because he was being chased by Superman from the 1960s, so he went back in time to hide. And so, Clark isn't able to warn Abraham Lincoln in time, as Luthor has him trapped, thinking that Clark's only in 1865 to capture him. It's only after Lincoln is killed that Lex Luthor realizes why Superboy was here in the first place. And he's just like, oh my god, I prevented you from saving Lincoln. I may be evil, but I respected him. He then lets Superboy go and feels extremely guilty for what he's done. While he failed here, there is actually a story where Superman was able to save Lincoln's life. In Superman issue 146, released in July of 1961, he attempts to go back in time to stop Atlantis from sinking. And he's actually able to do it. He decides to travel throughout history and prevent tragedies, with the assassination of Lincoln just being one of them. However, he then realizes that this was actually an alternate universe, and so that the Lincoln in his reality is still killed by John Wilkes Booth. The Supermobile. A lot of people online will make fun of the fact that Sonic the Hedgehog has a car in certain racing games. Like, why would he need one? The dude's the fastest thing alive. Surprisingly, nobody ever talks about how Superman also has a car. Not like, Clark Kent's car. I mean Superman's car, the Supermobile. First appearing in World's Finest, issue 77, released in July of 1955, the Supermobile was created by Batman as a gift for Superman. But it wasn't like a friendly gesture or something. He kinda had to, because in a recent battle with a villain named Professor Pender, Batman and Superman were both zapped with a ray that caused them to switch powers. So Batman got powers and Superman lost his. So Batman converted the Batmobile into the Supermobile for a brief period of time. Years later, in Action Comics issue 481, released in March 1978, Superman would get an actual Supermobile. After losing his powers for a brief period of time, Superman was once again forced to use a vehicle. But this Supermobile was a lot different from the one that Batman created. This vehicle could replicate most of Superman's powers, like flight, super hearing, super breath, X-ray vision, and even super punches. After this story, it would occasionally be used, but it would eventually fall into obscurity, which I think was something DC was okay with, as Cary Bates, one of the creators of the Supermobile, claimed that it was only created in the comics to promote the Corgi Toys toy line. Sand Superman. First appearing in Superman issue 233, released in January of 1971, Sand Superman is a bizarre creature known as a Quarmer. It was created when a portal was created after a nuclear meltdown occurred in the middle of the desert. Superman attempted to stop the meltdown but failed, and so, when the explosion happened, it knocked him out. He'd eventually wake up and discovered that due to the explosion, he no longer had any more weaknesses. After he left, a Quarmer emerged from the portal and attached itself to the imprint Superman left in the desert, creating Sand Superman. It would follow Superman around for a few and absorb some of his energy, which resulted in Superman losing bits and pieces of his powers over time. After a while, the Sand Superman comes to the conclusion that only one Superman can exist in this reality. Superman then is just like, dude, if you're not gonna give me my powers back, can you at least, like, save Metropolis for villains? And Sand Superman's like, nah, I'm good. Wanting his powers back, Superman was then given most of them back by I Ching. This almost kills Sand Superman. Wanting its powers back, it would attempt to take them back again, but was eventually forced to work with him in order to stop a monster. After stopping it, Sand Superman was like, alright, Supes, I'm gonna take your powers now. But then I Ching showed up and was like, wait, if you fight Superman, the Earth will blow up. And so, Sand Superman is like, oh, I'm sorry then, I'll leave. With only half of your powers. And so he returns to his dimension with half of Superman's powers. Since then, the idea of Sand Superman has been toyed around a bit, like in Action Comics' Future's End, where we see a reality where Sand Superman is created from the aftermath of one of Superman's final battles. But in this reality, he's a good guy. Mike Flanagan Superman film. In November 2022, it was revealed by director Mike Flanagan that he had actually met with Warner Bros. In 2017 to discuss possible projects for him to work on. This would ultimately lead to him working on the film Dr. Sleep, but according to Flanagan, he had showed up to the meeting to discuss a potential horror film starring Clayface, and a potential Superman project. As of right now, nothing is known about what the Superman project would have been. Could it have been Man of Steel 2, a reboot, an Elseworlds project? At the moment, nobody knows except Mike Flanagan and those that he met at Warner Bros. Horrible 90s costumes. In the 1990s, a lot of characters in both Marvel and DC went through some radical design changes. And a lot of them were pretty bad. Superman and some of his related characters were hit pretty hard with these redesigns. For example, in Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey, Superman is given a new costume called the Mother Box Armor. This armor can heal any of Superman's wounds and even teleport him to anywhere he wants. He's also got a lightsaber that plugs into his thigh strap. But when it comes to, like, looks, it screams action figure. Oh, wait. Also, there's the black suit he wore when he returned from the dead. And I know that people like it now, I'm fine with it personally, but what I'm not fine with is the idea of Superman packing heat. Power Girl also went through some weird design changes, like this one, with the yellow open chest swimsuit and the sweater collar. She also had this one, which was inspired by her Atlantean heritage, because for a while, Power Girl was retconned into actually being an Atlantean, except it was later retconned that she wasn't actually. General Zod on the Squad. In 2017, a very strange thing happened to the 2016 David Ayer film Squad, where after freeing General Zod from the Phantom Zone, Amanda Waller had the squad beat him up, which they were actually able to do, due to the fact that Zod wasn't at his full strength. He would then be imprisoned by Amanda Waller and have a bomb planted in his head, meaning that yes, for a brief period of time, General Zod was forced to join the Bye Bye Man Yourself squad. This wouldn't last very long, as while Zod did work with them for a few, he was eventually like, nah, I'm good, and used his laser vision to remove the bomb from his head. And afterwards, he wasn't very happy and began fighting the squad. The Feral Man of Steel. Released in June 1994, and written by Darren Vincenzo, The Feral Man of Steel is an Elseworld story that tells the story of what would happen if Kal-El landed in the jungles of India instead of Kansas. The story begins with Kal-El, or as he's known in this universe, KLL, and is almost killed by a tiger named Khan. He's then rescued by some wolves, and the pack raise him as one of their own. As he grows up, he befriends a Black Panther named Jad Baja and starts to develop his powers. One day he returns home to find that his wolf family is dead, killed by some hunters. Kal-El beats them up and flies away. He then kills Khan the Tiger and skins him, wearing his body. Later, when Lex Luthor and Lois Lane arrive in India during an expedition, Kal-El leads an animal army to wipe them out, but the attack is called off when Kal-El is like, "Wow, Lois Lane is pretty." If you haven't figured it out by now, this story is heavily influenced by Tarzan and the Jungle Book. Lex then captures Kal-El and attempts to use him to assassinate Queen Victoria so that he can take control of England. Kal refuses, fights Lex, and Lex is killed by some dude named Sir Richard, who is a real person by the way. Kal-El is then named Clark and is taken in as a member of the British Empire and becomes a colonizer. No, really, that's the ending. He spreads the British Empire around the world. What a happy ending. Superman XX. First appearing in Superman issue 181, released in November of 1965, Clark Kent T-5477, aka Superman XX, is the Superman of the year 2965. He's got most of Superman's standard abilities, but he's also got one major advantage over his 20th century ancestor. He's immune to kryptonite. Though he does have a kryptonite alternative: the Earth's oceans. It turns out by the year 2965, humanity will have a war called the Pollution War, which will end up making the world's oceans toxic to people. I wish I could say this was unrealistic. Anyways, his main villain seems to be Muto, a time-traveling alien, and also Joker XX, because I guess everybody in 2965 is just like, we gotta put XX after everything. Batman XX even shows up to help Superman XX battle Joker XX. During this battle, Joker XX gets struck by lightning and dies. It also turns out that Joker XX killed Batman XX's dad. To wrap this entry up, Superman XX actually appeared a handful of times in comics, with his most recent appearance being in Superman issue 136, released in July of 1998, where he battles some robots. Super Brother against Super Brother. In Superman issue 200, released in October of 1967, an imaginary story about Superman and his brother Hyperman was told. Well, it was originally an imaginary story, but like a lot of the imaginary stories, it was later retconned into being another universe. This one being Earth 200. Anyways, the story goes that in Kryptonopolis, the capital city of Krypton, that Brainiac has shrunken, but don't worry, in this universe Brainiac is actually a good guy, Kal-El and his brother Nor-El were part of a competition to see who would become Earth's Superman. Nor-El would end up beating Kal-El in the competition, and so he became Superman and took up the alternate identity, Ken Clarkson. Nor-El would do a pretty good job as Superman, until he'd eventually be beaten up with some kryptonite, which required Kal-El to travel to Metropolis and save him. The two bros teamed up and the day was saved. Kal would then take up the mantle of Hyperman and the secret identity of LeBlanc and fight crime in Canada. Supergirl and Comet the Horse. So Comet the Horse is well known for being Supergirl's horse. But what many people forget is that he's actually not a horse. He's just a centaur that looks like a horse. Originally, Comet was a centaur named Byron, who was turned into a horse by the sorceress Circe. But in Circe's defense, it wasn't actually her fault. Some wizard swapped the potions around, and he just ended up becoming a horse. But Circe thought it was her fault, and so gave Byron a potion that gave him immortality and superpowers. Then he was launched into space in an asteroid, where he'd be freed by Supergirl centuries later. Byron would become obsessed with Supergirl, and would later reunite with her, which would lead to the pair teaming up. Byron, now known as Comet, would eventually meet a wizard, who would give him the ability to turn into a human whenever a comet passed by Earth. He didn't tell Supergirl about this new human identity, and so when Supergirl saw him, she fell in love with him without knowing that he was her horse. By the way, Byron in his human form made out with Lois Lane once, and she was really into it. So Kara unknowingly fell in love with a horse. But surprisingly, she's not the only Supergirl to fall in love with a horse. Because of course not. Years later, Linda Danvers, the Earthborn angel that I talked about earlier, fell in love with a dude named Comet. Who's Comet? Well, he's not Comet the horse. This is the combination of a dead horse jockey named Andrew Jones and a woman named Andrea Martinez. And because they were combined, they became an Earthborn angel. Before being combined with Andrea Martinez, Andrew Jones had an accident that almost costed him his life, and was only saved by combining his DNA with horse DNA that turned him into a horse-like humanoid. And so when they combined, they took the form of a centaur. But he wasn't always a centaur, as he was originally just a dude who'd swap between Andrea and Andrew's personalities, and looked relatively human. Linda would only be in love with the Andrew personality while he looked like this. Comet would only become a centaur after being tortured by the Earthborn Angel of Light. So I guess in all fairness, this Supergirl didn't fall in love with a horse. She just fell in love with a dude named Comet, who was the combination of a dead horse jockey mutant and a random woman who would eventually become a centaur. Sunman. Sunman is a cancelled side-scroller action game that was planned to be released in 1992. Developed by EIM and published by Sunsoft, this game was mostly completed before its cancellation. Now you might be wondering why I'm talking about this game, since Superman isn't in it. Well, it's because Superman was originally going to be in the game. In 2008, the game's director, Kaiji Anno, confirmed in an interview that Sunman was originally going to be a Superman game, much like Sunsoft's two Batman games. During development of the game, DC backed out of the deal, and so EIM had to remove all traces of Superman from the game, resulting in Sunman. In 2009, Sunman was leaked online, and you can currently play it using an NES emulator. And finally, in 2014, a ROM hack for the leaked prototype was released that reintroduced all the Superman elements EIM was forced to remove. Superman owned by Marvel. During the 1980s, DC Comics was going through some serious financial issues. And in 1984, during discussions on what to do about these problems, DC management began considering selling Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, the Justice League, Teen Titans, and the Legion of Superheroes to Marvel Comics. This idea was given so much thought that John Bryan wrote a script and drew a cover for Superman, the first Marvel issue, the first installment of Superman's time under Marvel. This idea was scrapped, however, as Marvel was hit with an antitrust lawsuit, which caused Marvel to get cold feet about the whole deal. As for this cancelled issue, the script itself hasn't leaked online, but Jim Shooter has written a description of what the script's story was. It was basically just a retelling of the Superman origin story, with Lex Luthor showing up in the final panel. As for the cover art, it sadly never surfaced. Power Girl's diet soda addiction. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Power Girl joined Justice League Europe, and had many different adventures with them. However, during the course of her career with them, her behavior got more and more aggressive. And so, Dr. Light did some research and found out that the reason why Power Girl is so aggressive isn't because she herself is aggressive. No. It's the diet soda she's drinking. How did she become addicted to diet soda? Well, she apparently started drinking it to lose weight to live up to the ideal female body created by men. When she's confronted about the issue, she vows to quit drinking diet soda. And so, the world quickly forgot about Power Girl's diet soda addiction. Superman, George Washington, General Custer, and Abraham Lincoln go to the 24th century. In Action Comics issue 399, released in April 1971, Superman gets plucked out of time and sent off to the 24th century. Why was he taken to the future? Well, for history class. When Superman wakes up, he's met with George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and General George Custer. He's then told by scientists that he was killed in the 20th century by a space energy manta ray vampire. Comics are wild. Superman's just like, no, I wasn't. What are you talking about? He's then told that scientists on Earth then created 2 different clones of him in order to continue the Superman legacy. After the first clone died, the people of the future made a second one, and then they try to gaslight Superman into thinking that he's the second clone, who also died and had been teleported to the future to prevent his death. However, when this clone died, he saved the Earth, and so Superman, now believing that he is the second clone, returns to the 20th century to await the day he must sacrifice his life for the Earth. Except when he does return to his time and does do the mission that results in his supposed death, he doesn't actually die. He then realizes that the future he was taken to was the future of an alternate universe Earth. So he's just fine and not actually a clone. Also in this universe, Abraham Lincoln was elected president for life, George Washington freed the slaves, and George Custer is the chief of the Native American Federation. Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex. Written in 1969, Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex is an essay written by Larry Niven about how he thinks that Superman wouldn't be able to bang and have kids with human women. He argues that the genetic DNA in Superman's stuff would cause serious harm to any human woman. Also, according to Larry, if Superman is able to get Lois Lane pregnant, when the Kryptonian baby hybrid kicks, it would annihilate Lois. It's a very weird essay that concludes that the best way for Superman to have a kid on Earth is for a fetus to be implanted in his abdomen and born through a C-section. I hate this. I have no idea if I can link this, so I'm not taking the risk. If you want to find it, it's not hard. And I guess neither is Superman. Alright, and that's it. That's the end of the Superman Iceberg. That's 3 hours and, I think, 26 minutes. Insane. I knew it was going to be this long going into it. I knew it was going to be around this length. Yeah, I don't really have much to say outside of, please share this around, give it a like, comment, etc. Subscribe if you like the content. There's going to be a lot more Iceberg stuff in the next year. I don't normally ask those things, but this was a really big project, so I figured I'd ask. But I mean, it's the end of the video, so like 2 people are going to see this. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I certainly enjoyed making it. I learned a whole hell of a lot about Superman stuff. I have come out of this with a newfound respect. Well, I already had respect for the character, but like I have a new interest in Superman. Is what I'm trying to say here is that I'll probably check out some more of his comics and stuff like that. I actually purchased the big omnibus of whatever, the big collection of the Death and Return of Superman story arc. It's like 1,500 pages. Bought that recently. I'm gonna read that soon. Just that this Iceberg, it made me interested in the character, and I hope it made you interested in the character in case you weren't super big into Superman. Not much else to say. Have a good one. Have a great Christmas. Have a great Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever holiday you celebrate. Have a great holiday. And trust me, there's going to be a lot of content next year. There's going to be a whole heck of a lot of stuff. So stay tuned for that. Really stretching it the length here, so I'll wrap it up. Have a good one. Stay safe. See you next year.
We all hung out in a coffee shop called Poopy's.